You guys, should we go? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Leslie, the President and CEO of the Oakland Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and I would like to welcome you to the Chamber's 2020 Economic Summit, coming to you live stream from our Chamber offices here in downtown Oakland. As you know, Chamber leadership, in an abundance of caution, made the decision in light of the ongoing impacts of the COVID-19 virus to have this a live stream event only. We are grateful for the flexibility of both our members and attendees today, as well as our speakers and panelists, and would rather be together in person, but we assure you that you will receive all the data that we promised you, but just not the Danish. And although the term social distancing was not really in our daily vernacular 2 weeks ago, we are seeking to strike the right balance in continuing to amplify the tremendous efforts of the businesses represented here today, as well as to continue to provide you timely economic data that you enjoy from the Chamber over the last few years. Each paid attendee will be receiving a mailed copy of the 2020 Economics Report that will be obviously presented later today by Chris Thornburg with Beacon Economics. A few housekeeping notes for those watching. We will endeavor to keep on schedule and the schedule sent to you for all presentations, and would like this day to be as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions for the panelists or the speakers, please text them to 510-502-0254, and we will try to have responses to all of as many questions as we can. Now I would like to thank our sponsors of today's event, who really are the people who allow us to make these events possible, and particularly today with the unusual circumstances we find ourselves in. So I would like to thank our program sponsor, Kaiser Permanente, Visit Oakland, who we'll be hearing from soon, Southwest Airlines, a continued and long-term partner of the Chambers, Blue Shield of California, our newest member of the business community, and we're so grateful for their presence here in Oakland, and we will also be hearing from them later today. Comcast, a very important part of our business community, very important part of our Chamber leadership, and you will be hearing from Ken Maxey also later this morning. Donahue Fitzgerald Attorneys, UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, doing critical and important work for many of our most needy and underserved residents of our community, so we're very grateful for UCSF Benioff's work. And then as well as the Port of Oakland, which obviously is embarked on a very important endeavor this week, as well as the ongoing efforts with our trade and job creation here in our local economy. We'd also like to thank our business partner, the San Francisco Business Times, in amplifying this event, as well as the many members, again, who are present here online. So again, thank everybody. I thank everybody for their sponsorship and support, and again, we will be talking about you throughout the program. Now I would like to bring up our first spotlight presentation speaker. His name is Mark Everton. He is the CEO of Visit Oakland. Visit Oakland is doing tremendous work and also amplifying our wonderful community and encouraging folks to come visit and live here. So please welcome Mark Everton. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mark Everton, as Barbara said, the CEO of Visit Oakland, the Oakland Convention and Visitors Bureau. The news is a bit overwhelming regarding the effect on travel, and we've heard quite a bit about the virus. News reports today said that our daily lives are being reoriented. Dr. Fauci, who is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, I found my clicker, told us yesterday that we need to change the way we're living our lives. And we also heard today that there's recommendations for non-necessary travel to be curtailed. These are all very disconcerting and concerning for the tourism industry, and we're going to hear more about that from some of our economists later on today. Tourism industry is probably the most impacted segment from the virus, and again in Oakland we're seeing some effects of that. What I'd like to discuss today, though, is the importance of tourism in Oakland and Visit Oakland's role and what our future plans are to help amplify the voice of tourism throughout Oakland. And Visit Oakland's role is to promote travel and tourism in Oakland, and we celebrate our unique and diverse culture throughout Oakland, and we recognize all that Oakland has to offer as a place to visit, as a place to work, and as a place to operate a business. Just a little background. Visit Oakland is an independent nonprofit that's funded by guests staying in Oakland. Oakland hotels pay Visit Oakland in two different manners. One, we get a percentage of the overall revenue from the overnight stays, and secondarily, we've created a tourism business improvement district for the major hotels in Oakland, and they self-assess and pay us a $1.50 per room night. We are not affiliated with the City of Oakland, although we like to promote ourselves as being the marketing arm of the City of Oakland, but we don't receive any city or county funds. The economic benefits to Oakland are very interesting. If Oakland was a private employer, if tourism was a private employer in Oakland, it would be the second largest private employer. It employs over 7,500 people in Oakland. It generates close to we had 3.9 million visitors visit Oakland last year, and it generates close to $1 billion in business sales. And it also generates $31 million in hotel tax that goes straight to the city's general fund. Visit Oakland is really made up of 17 people that market, that greet, that inform, that inspire, and educate visitors and potential visitors about Oakland. And we do this through a variety of channels. We do it through marketing and advertising. We do it through running visitor centers. We've got a visitor center down in Jack London Square. We also just opened a visitor center at 13th and Broadway, really at the city center of Oakland, to help revitalize the 13th Street Commons. So if you get an opportunity, stop by that visitor center and learn more about Oakland and the neighborhoods that you might not already know. We also do trade shows and missions. We're on the road, and we like to say that we take Oakland out of Oakland and bring it to people that don't really have that much of an opportunity to experience Oakland. We do familiarization trips, bringing media and sales managers into Oakland so they can experience it and book business for us. And we also have a very robust public relations and media outreach, and we do a great deal with the media. National Geographic last year, as an effort, as an outcome of our outreach to the editors of National Geographic, and also Tommy Orange's book, There, selected Oakland as one of the best places to visit in the world in 2019. We were one of 30 destinations selected, and only 3 in North America. We also have an opportunity through our trade shows and our outreach to prospect groups and conferences. And last year, we were able to bring Afrotech to Oakland. Afrotech is the largest tech conference for people of color in the world. And we just met with them this week, and they have signed agreements to come back in 2020 and also in 2021. And we're looking at a growth of probably about 40% over last year. In addition to marketing and advertising, and as I mentioned, we take VO on the road. And one of the things that we did this year was we brought a portable visitor center that's made out of a shipping container, and we brought it to Louisville, Kentucky. And as a part of that program, we also created a speaker series, and one component of that was one that we referred to as Real Women, Real Leaders. And we asked our mayor and Barb Leslie and the other heads of the major chambers of Oakland to come out to Louisville and do a presentation on how women leadership in Oakland is really changing Oakland. And Oakland is a very different place today than it was a decade ago. And it's very much so because of the women that are leading Oakland and doing such a phenomenal job. It was the most well-received seminar that we did, and we've already seen some great results from bringing our leadership to Louisville, Kentucky. We also do a lot of local support. We support Black Joy that just occurred. We also are a big supporter of Pride, Dia de los Muertos down in the Fruitvale district, and our signature, which is Oakland Restaurant Week, which just concluded in January. We saw a 20% increase, generating about $300 million for our local restaurants. And we also incorporated events this year, all of which sold out. So an amazing opportunity to really promote Oakland's culinary theme and to do it throughout the entire Bay Area and bring people to Oakland that wouldn't normally come and visit us. So one of the questions with everything that's going on is what's next? What are we focused on the horizon? So we've really got 4 big proponents that we're working on. We're doing a leisure brand campaign, and that leisure brand campaign looks very similar to this, and our tagline on that is "See Things from Our Side," and we're using a series of Oakland residents to talk and promote Oakland through storytelling, and we're really focused on 4 pillars in that. So we've got somebody to talk about art and culture, somebody about our urban lifestyle, somebody to talk about our culinary scene, and also about family life in Oakland. So we're really talking about Oakland through Oaklanders, and the See Things from Our Side is really a double, triple entendre, and we're very excited about how we're being able to spin that. The other big piece that we're working on from a marketing standpoint is creating an ad campaign that's going to go out to meetings and conventions. And with that, we're saying, let's meet for real. That ties back into what we launched in Louisville with our Real Women, Real Leaders campaign. So we're looking to take your meeting someplace different, and that different is very much Oakland. And here's a shot of a scene that we did, and most of these people in the shot are actually meeting planners that were here for a familiarization trip. And the Oakland A's were very complimentary in letting us use their facility for that. We also have a new trade show booth in the works that we'll be able to take on the road this year. And we have a series of tours and experiences, including some self-guided tours, in addition to hosted tours throughout various areas of Oakland, areas that people wouldn't normally get a chance to experience. We're most excited about a Black Panther tour that will enable visitors to be able to experience kind of the heritage and the background of the Black Panther Party and where it originated in West Oakland and a lot of the key sites throughout Oakland. So really a wonderful opportunity for people in the Bay Area and visitors to Oakland to experience aspects of Oakland that they wouldn't normally have an opportunity. So I hope that gave you a little introduction and a little explanation of what Visit Oakland does and how we're so proud of Oakland and what a great job we're doing marketing Oakland and bringing people in. And we hope that we can quickly overcome this little hiccup that we've run into that's affecting tourism around the world, and that we get back on track. Thank you so much. I think our next presentation is going to be, Ken, are you up next? Barb's coming back? Okay.
Hello again. Thank you very much to Mark Everton, CEO of Visit Oakland, for that presentation and your continued commitment to showing the world this wonderful city that we live in. I would now like to bring up our panel discussion. And I first will bring up our moderator, actually, Ken Maxey with Comcast will be moderating the panel. And we have three very esteemed guests representing different aspects of local and state government, as well as important organizations supporting the work we're doing statewide. First off, I'll bring up Micah Weinberg with California Forward. Micah used to run the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute and has been with California Forward for now...
less than a year.
Less than a year. Oh, yes, we will provide microphones for everybody. They're right there. Good. Okay. And then I would like to bring up the mayor of Oakland, our good friend, Mayor Libby Schaaf. And very shortly joining us, Mayor Darrell Steinberg from the city of Sacramento. And we're very pleased to have this esteemed group of panelists to talk about equity through economic development and a variety of different other very important issues facing our local communities and our state currently. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken, our our moderator. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to welcome Mayor Steinberg to the panel. Good morning, Mayor Steinberg. Yes. Wonderful. We have changed locations, so we have to accommodate those changes. Again, I'm going to turn it over to Ken to begin the panel discussion. And again, thank you for your patience.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Barb, for your leadership. with the Chamber. She's been a fearless leader for the Oakland Chamber and has really made a difference here in the city of Oakland. Without further ado, let's really get this conversation started. Thank you, mayors and Micah, for being here. We believe that there's an opportunity here in Oakland more so than any time in history. And so having the mayor who has been a champion and the mayor of Sacramento that's been a champion of small businesses, we really think that this year, 2020, is a game-changing year in many ways. So let me start off with question number one. Obviously, we know that housing and homelessness is a crisis. The Chamber's annual voter poll released in the fall found that 96% of Oakland voters ranked homelessness as extremely or very serious problem. The sentiment cut across all council districts, races, ethnicities, and income levels. Let's start by talking about the elephant in the room, homelessness. Please share your thoughts on your ways to address this crisis. And Mayor, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's really wise of the Chamber to recognize that homelessness is an issue and it affects the economy, really like nothing else we've ever seen. But the good news is that there is a level of work and collaboration and coordination like I've never seen before, where really everyone is unifying around real solutions and not just responding to the crisis, not just trying to get people off the streets into safety and services. And I want to recognize that the Chamber's been a great partner in that, but also recognizing that as Californians, we've got a housing security issue. And that is not just a crisis response, that requires some systems change. And I just have to say to our audience, you look marvelous this morning, all right? You look just, don't change anything. It's great. Daryl.
Well, thank you for having me down to Oakland, Mayor Schaaf. It's wonderful to be here and to be here with the Oakland Chamber. There is no question that homelessness and housing insecurity is now the issue of our time. It is interesting to me when Governor Newsom gave his State of the State address that was devoted exclusively to housing, homelessness, and mental health. I said I've been waiting for that speech for 25 years because those issues have never risen to the top of the political priority list, but now they are. And that is a good thing, but it's not a good thing because I think it speaks to the magnitude of the crisis. We have a lot of, it's a very complex problem, and people are homeless for many, many different reasons. Certainly the economic factor has become even more predominant than the what we think of when we think of the homeless, the chronically homeless who have been out on the streets with mental illness or substance abuse for a long time. But as you and I have discussed a lot, Mayor Schaaf, I think sometimes we take complex issues and we fail to distill some simple truths. And one of the truths is that while we need more resources to be able to combat the magnitude of the problem, those resources need to be focused in ways that actually lead us to the goal that we seek. And this is as much a challenge of public policy as it is a money issue. And it's only when we combine more resources with what you and I have called for, a legal mandate by all levels of government to bring people indoors and to serve them and to move and to get people into permanent housing, that I believe this will change. We can talk more about that.
I agree with you, Madam Mayor, that the audience looks fantastic.
You
although
look fabulous.
with an event starting at 8 a.m. today, I'm assuming maybe half of them are probably in their pajamas watching this event. So we'll see. It's a new normal. Pajamas at a chamber event. But in any case, very little that I could add to that. I mean, at a fundamental level, the solution to homelessness is homes. Both people being able to move into new homes that are produced and people being able to remain in the homes they are currently in. That's why both protection and production are an essential part of not just responding to the crisis, but dealing with this on a more systematic level. And so I'm going to start the panel today by kissing up to two of my favorite people in California who happen to be on this panel with me. And that is Mayor Schaaf and Mayor Steinberg. And that is because they have both taken very seriously both pieces of this challenge. We need to keep people in their homes. We need to prevent homelessness. We need to avoid gouging of renters. We need to make sure that people have permanent supportive housing, affordable housing, and so on. And we also need to understand if you keep a basic human necessity, homes, very, very limited in number, it will not turn out well for lower income people. That's not even economics 101, that's life, right? And the challenge there is that a lot of people have difficulties with these more, solutions that put together different pieces of the problem. And so there are challenges making it happen in Oakland and Sacramento, but I think that you've both done absolutely amazing work there. However, the cities can't do it by themselves. If we don't have regional actors, other cities, small cities, all around the Sacramento region, all around the Bay Area, all around Los Angeles, also taking the same aggressive steps on production and preservation, the awesome steps that are being taken in Sacramento and Oakland will not be successful. So everyone needs to get on board with this. Cupertino needs to get on board with this. Elk Grove, all the other cities around our region need to be on both production and preservation and protection if we're going to really address this crisis on a structural level.
Absolutely.
I want to add something because I think it's really important that people recognize that the nature of homelessness has changed. We've always seen drug addiction and mental health as a huge driver of homelessness. But what we're seeing now that we haven't seen in the past is that the sheer cost of housing is what is responsible for the increase in homelessness. And I'm not sure that everybody recognizes that. We have huge numbers of unsheltered people that actually hold jobs. They literally work and then try and stay awake at night or sleep on a park bench. I mean, this is the state that we've come to. And in the Bay Area, we've become so expensive that it's just 8 years ago that if you earned the median income, you could afford the median rent for all of the Bay Area. And now that number is less than 30% of the Bay Area is affordable to someone who makes the median income, $100,000 for a family. So that is a huge change. It's happened very quickly, and it is a result of both income inequality, but also a huge limitation on our supply of housing.
And Mayor, this inequity, talking about faces of high levels of racial disparities in income, what are some of the promising practices for ensuring that the rising tides doesn't, in fact, lift all boats?
Well, I think we need to recognize that our cities need to be leaders when it comes to inclusive economic development and a job strategy. That's why Mayor Schaaf and I and our respective cities are working so hard to attract new and clean industries all of the time, because housing costs have got to come down. We need more diversity of housing product for people, no question about it. But it's also working on the inclusive economic development end and the jobs end and workforce training, which has been a passion of mine for a long time. And I know Oakland, again, has been a state leader when it comes to the development of career pathways for young people to educate and train young people for the new economy. And so we've got to have, cities have got to take the lead. The state provides a lot of the tools. The counties, of course, are subdivisions of the state in terms of the health and human services piece. But it's really the cities that have to drive the economic renaissance of our cities, where we focus on young people, on disadvantaged neighborhoods, on career pathways, on attracting new, clean industries, and on affordable housing. You get that combination working together, you have a city that is on the move.
And Mayor, I know, Mayor Steinberg, you focused a lot on linked learning some years ago. Could you talk a little bit about that and what that actually looks like today?
Sure. That was one of my great causes in the legislature, because there was this great divide between the high standards advocates and the vocational ed advocates. And they were both right and they were both wrong, because the high standards folks said every kid should have the opportunity to go to college, and therefore we need to teach academics. And the voc ed folks said, well, not everyone's going to go to college, and we need to train young people to be plumbers and electricians. The truth is that we need our high schools to change so that they combine academic rigor and career application across the board, like they do in many places in Europe, like Switzerland, because a young person ought to have the ability to choose to go to college, but also to go the trade or the technical route if they want or choose. And our system, our culture, frankly, is too much either or. Every young person ought to have a paid work experience their junior or senior year. That ought to be state policy, in my view, to help us forge these pathways for young people. And now that's what they're practicing in Oakland, some in Sacramento, but none of it's to scale.
So I want to talk a little bit more about inclusive growth. So at California Forward, we're all about inclusive, sustainable growth. And growth is an important piece of that. Sometimes people talk about the triple bottom line, right? But it's important that the triple bottom line also includes the actual bottom line. Being from Appalachian, Ohio, where our economic heyday was in 1910, and it's all been downhill since then, and there hasn't been any growth for decades. Let me tell you, not having growth is actually not a solution for equity either. However, we need to make sure that we are doing economic development in a fundamentally different way. And so that means, among other things, having people who are authentic community representatives at the table from the beginning of the production of the strategy for inclusive prosperity. And that means you don't wait until you sort of have the decision and you have the public meeting and people get upset at you, right? People need to be involved in and bought into the plan, but that also means that people need to be moving from a position of sort of advocacy into a position of public leadership. And understanding that public leadership means making trade-offs across a range of different things and being one of those people who is the steward of their communities. So if we're going to, do a good job during this period of economic volatility, which is all that we know that it is at this point, we need to be approaching this with a fundamentally different model of economic development that is more inclusive from the outset.
And I want to add something because we're talking about inequities. Oakland is really contributing in this area with a race analysis. And I think it's important that people recognize that structural racism. So this is not, individual people's feelings. This has to do with structures and practices that we have inherited from a past time. And whether it's the legacy of redlining or past discrimination in housing and employment, this structural racism is driving a huge disparity in our homeless population. And so we need to recognize that and then ask ourselves, what about our systems for bringing people out of homelessness need to be adjusted so we start seeing an end to these huge differences in the rate, particularly of African Americans, becoming homeless.
Can I get all YIMBY for just a second? Yes. All right. So one of our structurally racist legacies in the state of California and elsewhere is urban downzoning, right? It was, go back and read the texts. It was explicitly designed for exclusion of all sorts of people, including, my dad's generation, right? Ironically, when I lived in Sacramento for several years.
Why did you leave?
I'm sorry,
because Oakland is so cool, and that's where he moved.
I love the Northern California mega region. We're all in this together, right? And so I bought a house, and I was you sign like 100 pages or something like that. And like at the back, there's like this mimeograph thing, and it wasn't really easy to read. And I'm like trying to read it pretty closely. And it made me promise, and this was very awkward for Micah Daniel Weinberg, that I would not sell my house to a Jew, right? Like that was something that still existed on the books until fairly recently. And that wasn't the only category of people I wasn't supposed to sell the house to. So all of these, there's a tremendous amount of discrimination in housing, and that discrimination is the exclusion of people from housing, the reduction of housing size. These aren't things that were the case in the middle of the century, and we really need to go back to a period of time where we undo that piece.
I just want to add a point real fast, that we had a question from the audience that's actually watching online that is to this point of around seniors and homelessness and providing some type of housing for them. What does that look like? And what are some examples, if there are any, in the country today that we can address?
I'll just add, in Oakland, Margot Kuchel, who is the doctor from UCSF Benioff's hospitals, who's kind of the national researcher on homelessness, did a deep dive on homeless seniors in Oakland. And it's really disturbing. Our elders are becoming homeless for the first time in record numbers. And it has to do with, again, an inability to have planned for retirement that keeps up with the unbelievable explosion in cost of living. And what we're seeing is the need to create a system that actually doesn't really exist right now. And that is, we do have, senior affordable housing, but often people just need a shallow subsidy to be able to make their rent payments. That is not something that we've created as a state. We have very limited Section 8, vouchers that kind of do that, but for a fraction of the people who qualify for it. And the second piece is that seniors need some level of support, but not to the extent or expense of traditional, what we call permanent supportive housing, which has very robust wraparound services on site. And so that's kind of a new adjustment that we are talking about. And again, I want to really thank Dr. Kuchel for focusing her research on Oakland, because it's going to allow us to kind of start some of these models that hopefully other cities will benefit from.
I'd like to just pick up a little bit on what Mayor Schaaf is talking about, but also what Micah was talking about around the history here and around the role of state policy. Because battles are being fought currently. SB 50 was maybe the latest chapter of the battle. To try and direct state policy towards inclusion when it comes to housing and affordable and workforce housing. And whether or not one was for or against SB 50, I was for it strongly. The fact of the matter remains is that the state policy does not push hard enough, does not direct, does not hold cities that aren't doing their fair share to account when it comes to building the kind of housing that we need. And yes, there are regulatory impediments to building more affordable housing, but the truth of the matter is that the big cities of California cannot do it alone. And until there is a state drive to actually recognize that we are all in this together, it's going to be difficult, because we speak with forked tongue, frankly, in the state. We say on the one hand, housing is a crisis. On the other hand, we don't back that up necessarily, because some communities, frankly, don't want their fair share of affordable housing. And it's that political dialectic, if you will, and that contradiction that I think we have to grapple with. Maybe the crisis has now gotten so bad that the state policies will in fact become much more aggressive on homelessness and on affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's going to be critical, though, is making sure that we have a housing policy that works for the different regions based on their different needs. So there's some areas where if you permit something, it magically appears because the economy supports that. There are other areas where cities really need substantial infrastructure funding to make sure that projects pencil. There are other areas where we need financing vehicles for ADUs. But we actually need all of those things. So we need SB 50 plus this, plus that. But we hear all of this like, well, we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution, so we end up with a no-sizes-fits-anybody solution, and that's not a good step.
I guess my point is that we have no production standards. We have a state law that has very little teeth around a regional housing needs assessment.
Right, absolutely.
Where the requirement is to just set aside land to build the housing, but there's no requirement to meet timing, to meet the timing requirements, to produce anything. And this is what we're grappled with through our homeless task force, but it's a broader issue around the state's role vis-a-vis local government when it comes to housing. We shouldn't tell local government how to do it necessarily, but I think it's appropriate for the state to say, we all must do it if we're going to meet the needs.
Well, and I want people to see and understand that even though you have your home, this housing crisis affects you. When you are stuck in a traffic jam, it is because so many workers in the Bay Area have to commute out from Tracy and Manteca to the job centers in the Bay Area. If your kid's favorite teacher has to quit in the middle of the school year, which happened to me, it's because that teacher couldn't find housing she could afford. If your parents suddenly have an interruption in senior care, these are all things that are impacting you, whether you see them or not, because this is the housing crisis. No one can escape its impacts, but we just need to see that all these things trace back to our inability to provide sufficient supply of housing that all Californians that we need to keep a robust economy going really need.
Based on that, Mayor Schaaf, what are some public-private partnerships going on today that both you and Mayor Steinberg are really excited about that are around housing and or preparing to talk about housing in a different way?
Oh, there's so many. I could talk about this forever, but let me just highlight two really quickly. One is Keep Oakland Housed. When we talk about homelessness, a lot of people aren't focusing on preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place. You know, the horror, the soul-scathing reality of people on the street obviously is what captures your energy first. But let's try and make sure that no one ever has to experience that. And the San Francisco Foundation, Crank Start Foundation, Kaiser Permanente banded together with the city of Oakland to really see how we could intervene quickly, not just with one-time financial help, because a lot of people are facing an eviction because they haven't been able to pay for their utilities or their rent, but also with legal assistance to get out of that eviction and case management to make sure that once that one-time financial assistance has been given, that household, that family can actually stay stably housed. And in just the first year and a half of this pilot, we've kept more than 2,100 Oakland families in their homes. And the average cost has been less than $3,000. That is a whole lot more efficient use of funding than what it costs once someone has gotten onto the street. And the second example I want to highlight, you know, government is not getting enough money to build the supply of affordable housing that we need, especially after the dissolution of redevelopment, which was our significant funding source. But I really appreciate companies stepping up and recognizing that they have to start financing workforce housing, or sometimes we call it the missing middle. And that if you are willing to take, you know, a 3% return on your investment, these projects are really self-sustaining. They don't need deep subsidies. And so, for example, Kaiser Permanente started an actual loan fund, a revolving loan fund, to help not just build workforce housing, but to acquire existing housing, what we call the preservation strategy, to buy existing housing and put affordability protections on that housing so that going forward, people moving in have to be of a certain income, and that housing will be preserved for that, you know, type of worker forever. So exciting.
Yeah, I think this gets back to what you were saying about it's not just, it's money, yes, but it's also the structure of public policy. Right now we spend, you know, we did this study at the Bay Area Council Economic Institute is the last thing that I was doing when we were hanging out there, Mayor Schaaf. And, you know, homelessness is about preventing homelessness, dealing with people when they are homeless and helping them as much as we can, and then getting people out of homelessness. So many of our resources are devoted only to that middle piece. And obviously, people who are unhoused deserve services, and we should give them as much comfort as we can possibly give them. But there's a misalignment of resources and focus because the money that we put into preventing homelessness is a rounding error compared to the money that we put into people once they are already on the streets. So that's a money issue, but it's also a public policy issue.
I agree. I mean, in Sacramento, we just announced a proud partnership with a great Oakland headquartered company, Kaiser. Kaiser is working with us, putting forward $32.5 million in partnership with Sacramento to not only increase our navigation center and shelter capacity, but more significantly, $25 million to partner with our newly established public housing trust fund of $100 million. They're matching $25 million. And it's going to help us dramatically increase the supply of very low-income housing here in Sacramento. And you know, that is one example of a number of examples. But I want to just agree with what both of you said a moment ago. The most Pyrrhic victory around homelessness is the fact that we actually are getting thousands of people off the streets. It's just that they're being replaced by the next cohort of thousands of people. And so you're absolutely right. The prevention strategy is key, and what you're doing in Oakland here, what other cities are doing, what we're beginning to do in Sacramento, $1,000 loan or a grant when an unanticipated medical bill or a broken down car is the difference between staying housed and not staying housed is such an obviously solid investment to help somebody stay housed. But we need to be more nimble in the way that we offer this kind of assistance because wait lists are too long, the portals are too difficult for people to enter, and this is where the public policy now needs to go towards assuring that the resources are consolidated, that the county over here isn't holding on to, a lot of mental health money while the city is trying to grapple with getting people with mental illness off the street. We need to work much closer together.
Oakland has just got a new company that moved in recently and actually is one of the sponsors for today's summit, Blue Shield. I know Blue Shield's also doing some work in Sacramento. Talk about that new opportunity for Oakland, as well as some of the partnerships that you think are going to take place with that new
Yeah, I want to
business moving
recognize
town.
that as new businesses are moving into Oakland, as the mayor, we always have to be very clear what our values are and what our expectations are for the new corporate members of our community. And Blue Shield is a great example of how a company can come in to a city. And I'll just mention two examples. One, we talked about the kind of income side of the income inequality problem. And while technical education is incredibly important, there are very few scholarship programs or financial assistance for that, as well as for college, particularly for kids in Oakland who often are the first in their families. So Blue Shield, in honoring their arrival, made a significant contribution to the Oakland Promise. And it's not just that they wrote a check. They are encouraging their employees to serve as mentors to our first-time college students and also provide internships and summer jobs. It's a great partnership. They also were one of the first to answer Governor Gavin Newsom's call as he set up a statewide fund to address homelessness with a $20 million contribution. And I'm sure that our cities will eventually be the beneficiaries of that investment. Thank you, Blue Shield.
Thanks, Blue Shield.
But it's really important that these businesses understand their role as civic stewards, because they can have an extraordinarily important role. They do so through such organizations like the Oakland Chamber of Commerce and other groups. And when businesses do come together like this, they can make a big difference in the community. And trust me, if you have locally headquartered businesses, it works out a lot better. It's very difficult to get the attention of businesses that are headquartered elsewhere. So you need a robust small business community, medium-sized business community, and large headquarters communities so that the business community can play that kind of a civic stewardship role.
So we're going to move on to another topic, and this is a very current topic, partnerships with cities and counties, perhaps particularly now with the coronavirus going on. How does that evolve, the partnerships between the counties and the cities, so that residents are feeling that there is really a great relationship between cities and counties, which traditionally has not always been the case? And so what is being done today around the coronavirus, and then as we look at homelessness and also housing?
You know, with every crisis, there's an opportunity. And I would say that especially, you know, I've got a giant cruise ship at my port right now. And it actually has been a very, in some ways, uplifting experience to see how people can really pull together and collaborate and coordinate in times of crisis. And I don't want to make people unduly panicked, but I am impressed that more than ever, I'm seeing the business community, different aspects of folks recognizing that we have an opportunity to prevent a crisis. And that by practicing social distancing, just like the Chamber is doing this morning, great example, you are leading by example. These are things that we can do now to actually prevent a catastrophe. So it has, I think, brought the city and the counties closer together. We play different roles. And the county, you know, has a public health focus. And I think that's one of the reasons, and I'll just talk about homelessness again for 1 second. Cities and counties approach homelessness differently. I've got to keep my sidewalks open or I'll get sued under the ADA. I need to keep my roadways clear. I need to pick up the garbage. Whereas the county is thinking about someone's medical condition. They're thinking more on the individual level. And I think both of those approaches are important and need to be combined so that we can really make progress in these different challenges.
You know, the people, of course, don't care whether or not it's the city's responsibility or the county's responsibility. They expect us to work together in crisis. And it is true that the cities are not the Health and Human Services agency. We're not the public health officials. And yet the mayors are really the leading spokespersons, I think, for their larger community. And so this coronavirus in my part of California has actually significantly enhanced our relationship with the county because we are all in this together. And there are a lot of questions, right? Major public facilities and private businesses are asking the same question that the Oakland Chamber has asked here. Should we have our gathering or should we do it in a different place? Certainly when it comes to the sporting venues and theater and other entertainment venues, there are a lot of questions being asked in real time. And the only way to make the best decisions is to ensure that they include our public health officials and that every leadership stakeholder is around a table without it being too onerous or burdensome, helping input on the decision. So when the decision is made, the public knows that it was not a random decision. We just had a incident in Sacramento where an entire school district shut down, the Elk Grove School District. And so I was asked about it, and I said, I choose not to second guess anybody's decision because I wasn't in the room. And these are tough decisions. But going forward, I want to make sure there's a protocol where the community leadership and the public health officials are in a room together before big decisions are made that affect public spaces and major public events.
Yeah, and I mean, so I hope we can build on this situation because our system of government in California is a mess. I'm sorry it is. If you know anything in any detail about our cities and our counties and our special districts and our school districts and how they are completely uncoordinated, you will be concerned about this, right? A lot of our focus for some people in California has been concerns about what's happening at the federal level. But the truth is that the fact that we have a system where we're having thousands of different, in some cases incompatible responses to a public crisis is actually a much bigger threat to us here than some of what's happening at the federal level.
Can we get back to homelessness for just a moment?
Absolutely.
Because this is, I believe, one of the key reasons why it has been so difficult to make a greater impact. There's too much fragmentation. There are too many programs, an alphabet soup of funding sources, but too many jurisdictions. And everything we do in this space, as we've said many times, is optional and voluntary. And so Mayor Schaaf leans in. I lean in. Other jurisdictions lean in. Some jurisdictions don't lean in. And the money is not all brought together, and there's no requirement to make siting decisions as quickly as possible. That's why the state public policy needs to be many things, but first and foremost around setting a standard and benchmarks and require us all to consolidate our approaches and our resources regionally, yes, so that we're driving towards a result. And until we end that fragmentation by requiring the result that we want to see, or at least movement towards that result, it's going to continue to be a hodgepodge of good and great efforts, but not efforts that maximize what we could do together.
So we have a few minutes left. I have a couple questions I still want to get
Absolutely.
answered by these esteemed panel.
So are we in a lightning round?
Absolutely,
Are we lightning
something
round
like that.
now?
I'll keep it short.
Okay.
So there was a mention of sports teams and stadiums, and so I was thinking, you know, Sacramento, geez, has a great stadium, a basketball arena called Golden One, and you just got something approved that's going to be a state-of-the-art soccer stadium or football, depending on how you want to talk about it. Talk a little bit about how that happened and what that's doing for the downtown and for the city of Sacramento, because I think, as a follow-up, Mayor Schaaf, what are you hoping that a new stadium will do for the city of Oakland?
So again, crisis sometimes can lead to a great result, because in 2010 to 2013, there were a number of efforts by the prior ownership of the Sacramento Kings, our NBA franchise, to move the team out of town. And it came to a head in 2013 when a Seattle ownership group was this close to buying the Kings from the then local ownership group. And so my predecessor, Mayor Johnson, rallied to put together an investor group, worked with the NBA commissioner. They gave us one shot. My role when I was the Senate leader was to pass a bill that would provide CEQA streamlining around any CEQA lawsuit, and also prevent the opponents of the arena from enjoining its progress.
Now, this was not a lightning round question.
Yes, sorry.
Anytime you get into CEQA.
Sorry, I'll be quick.
No, I'm just saying. No,
it was not lightning. SB 743, we passed the bill. The NBA decided to keep the Kings in Sacramento. We won. The downtown arena was built, and now our downtown is literally changing overnight. K Street, L Street, J Street, the number of people downtown now, the restaurants, it's all filling in. The work is far from done, but sometimes a crisis and saving a major asset can lead to the revitalization of your downtown. It's a very cool story.
Yeah, and it's also important to say that, like, a lot of times when people criticize sports stadiums, they say, well, it just moves economic activity around the region. But if it moves it to the center of the region, which is the hub of the regional transportation network, and revitalizes the downtown instead of puts additional malls on greenfields, this is actually a positive public policy goal. If you haven't been to Sacramento recently, you've got to go to Sacramento. It is a changed city.
That was a paid advertisement by the Sacramento Chamber of
I'm
Commerce.
just trying to make you feel better, because I said I left Sacramento, but I still love Sacramento.
So before we go, we still have one more question, but Mayor Schaaf, the new stadium and what you think that will do.
Well, listen, I'm excited. In fact, we used your CEQA streamlining example to do a similar thing for a new A's ballpark. But I want to be clear that not all change is good. We are being very mindful that our great Port of Oakland, our industrial uses, our great working class jobs, that those are also protected as we bring a waterfront ballpark to Oakland. And I believe we can do both as long as we are very clear and intentional about having a goal of doing both. And that is definitely where I am. It is also important that we look out to East Oakland and just seeing what possibilities we can do, because let's be honest, the activity out there right now has not been neighborhood serving, and we have an opportunity to do something that will really help the current residents of East Oakland. So again, I think we learn from past mistakes. I will not ever do a loan that is guaranteed by the city's general fund, because that did not work out well for Oakland. I've been very stubborn about that. These are privately financed sports stadiums, and they're being done in a way that expects very robust community benefits and a lot of thoughtfulness about not just do we want our city to change, but how do we want it to change. And as an Oakland native girl, I am not selling out the soul of my city.
Yeah, but I think it's important that, like, how do we want the city to change is a conversation everybody needs to be involved in, and everybody needs to understand that there will be change, right? So the conversation, the way that it should be, how it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it isn't going to be that way. So we need to get at the table. We need to make sure we're being inclusive in these tables so that, back to the topic of the panel, our growth, which we need, is actually equitable growth.
One word answer really from the mayors. There's a lot of people that are watching this from home. And they're watching it from home for two reasons. One, because there's a coronavirus that we all are being affected by and we're trying to protect each other. But secondly, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that do work from home. And they're small business owners, and they need incentives and practice and relationships with county, city. What are you doing? Well, maybe that's not the right way to pose the question. Is the city doing something to incentivize this type of business and entrepreneurship in your city?
Yes, that was a one-word answer.
Yes.
But two things: Small Business Assistance Center with the City of Oakland, and also Kiva, KIVA.org, which is the only zero-fee, zero-interest loan, microloan, that is specifically for people that have been, again, let's talk about structural racism again, that have been shut out of access to commercial capital. There's a joke that if you can qualify for a commercial loan, you probably don't need it, because you have to show so much credit, score and cash flow and collateral. So things like Kiva and Oakland's, we're their most successful city in America. More than 825 zero-fee, zero-interest loans to Oakland entrepreneurs, 85% of whom are people of color and 71% women-owned businesses. So that, I think, is disrupting the barriers to being an entrepreneur in Oakland.
I love it. And we are going in that same direction with our inclusive economic development funding strategy through what we call Measure U, setting aside significant dollars to help small businesses in our neighborhoods start and to grow.
One quick important thing.
Absolutely.
Governor Newsom announced a Broadband for All project at the California Economic Summit last year. We're going to be hearing more about that soon. Broadband for all, accessible and affordable broadband, is necessary if we're going to empower that kind of entrepreneurship.
And thank you for that, because as a person that works for a company called Comcast, we have a program called Internet Essentials for any student or anyone that's actually qualified. Please check it out at internetessentials.com. But in the meantime, I just want to thank each one of the esteemed panelists. From the audience, we have about 20 of you in the room today, but thank you all for being part of this, and thank you. Let's move on to the next panel. Thank you, Mayor Schaaf. Thank you, Mayor Steinberg. Micah.
I want to again thank our wonderful panelists for being here today and taking time out of their schedules and running their cities and participating in our state economic development conversation. Obviously, a wonderful list of questions and presentation. I do want to let everybody know that we did take a staff vote earlier as to whether or not I could wear my pajamas to this event this morning, and the answer was no, as you can see. So For those of you who are watching from home, and we have many, actually hundreds at this point, we thank you for participating in this conversation. We will try to get to your questions, and we hope you are enjoying this from your home in the comfort of your own pajamas. I want to now invite up our next spotlight speaker. His name is Danny Wan. He is the Executive Director of the Port of Oakland. Come on up, Danny. Point of personal privilege, I'm myself a port commissioner here in Oakland, and we made the decision last fall to hire Danny as our executive director, and we couldn't have picked a better person at a better time in maintaining consistency and continuity around port leadership, particularly in times like today, obviously. Not knowing what these times were going to be like, but we just really appreciate and admire his leadership. He's been with the port for many years and will continue to lead us through this this particular situation, and then obviously beyond, as the port is such an important ecosystem, both here locally in job creation, but really its impacts regionally and really nationally as one of our major ports in the country. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Danny to give his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I, of course, have the privilege of having Barb Leslie on our Board of Port Commissioners, and that is being a real asset to us. So good morning. Thank you, Chamber of Commerce, for inviting me to have this opportunity to provide an update on the Port of Oakland. It's an honor to address the current situation with the port and our plans. But before I give you an update, I'd like to provide an overview what the Port of Oakland does for those of you who might not be familiar with the port, and even if you think you are familiar, you might be surprised. So could we have a little video on that subject?
Coming off a strong year, the Port of Oakland is poised to move forward on key projects. Our 3 lines of business support more than 84,000 jobs in Oakland and the region. The port drives economic vitality throughout the Bay Area. We're everyone's port. Port staff and our business partners keep everything moving.
We're really excited about the 4 new SSA 174-foot cranes coming into OICT this year. It will allow us to work the larger vessels that we anticipate coming our way. We really look forward to our continued relationship with the Port of Oakland staff on projects throughout the rest of the year. It's all about bringing new business.
And where might future cargo go?
Construction of the first warehouse at the Seaport complex is being built right next to the Seaport operations. It will stimulate local business. One of the things that is very exciting about this project is that it has a jobs agreement which will bring economic access to local residents.
The Centerpoint Properties development represents $60 million of private investment in Oakland's future. It will enhance logistics by reducing truck travel times, distance, and cost due to proximity to freeways, marine terminals, and rail yards. That's better for the environment and the community. The port works closely with the community and its business partners to jointly take action on key community concerns. Together, we are cleaning the air, educating local youth, and delivering jobs and other significant benefits to support a better quality of life for our neighbors. Oakland International Airport has operated at near capacity, with passenger activity increasing 40% since 2014. We're exploring how to meet anticipated future growth in both the business and leisure travel sectors. We're making numerous improvements at the airport to enhance our customers' experience, including unveiling new food and beverage concessions in 2020 with local favorites.
Our team is delighted that Red Bay Coffee was selected to be one of the concessions at the Oakland International Airport. Red Bay Coffee sources its beans from all over the world. Being at the Oakland International Airport is another opportunity for us to connect to the global community. We hope it makes everyone's trip just a little bit more special.
This year, we are raising the airport perimeter dike to protect from sea level rise as projected for the next 30 years. Miles of waterfront are under the port's jurisdiction, including Jack London Square. CIM Group manages the square for the port, works with tenants, and has some notable projects launching in 2020.
We're looking forward to welcoming residents to Channel House, a 333-unit, 8-story apartment building with ground floor retail at Jack London Square. Jack London Square is a destination with great food, entertainment, and lots of community events. We're so happy to be part of the continued growth at Jack London Square.
Coming this summer is Oakland Assembly, a 40,000 square foot market hall. A number of celebrity chefs have signed on to this CIM project that will enhance Jack London Square's reputation as a food lover's destination and fun place to be. The Port is considering a proposal to build a baseball stadium at Howard Terminal. There's plenty of work to do before a final decision is reached, and the Port Board of Commissioners is committed to ensuring that the project is compatible with seaport operations. Port staff, business partners, and their thousands of employees keep things moving at the Port of Oakland. Thank you, dock workers, truckers, service staff, construction crews, engineers, airline employees, and so many more.
We're everyone's port.
Indeed, we are everyone's port. We generate about 84,000 jobs for our community beyond in the Bay Area. In the world that we're talking about economies of the tech and also virtual economies and working from home, I think people need to be reminded, and I as port director want to remind people, that the old line industries in Oakland, ports, airports, and restaurants and services and visitors is still one of the largest job generators in Oakland. Indeed, as the mayor says, we are an industrial city, and that is our job space. So just to remind you that the Port of Oakland runs 3 lines of business. The port is where 13.4 million passengers fly for work and leisure through the Oakland International Airport. The port is where you get some of your best shoreline parks and trails in the East Bay, and where you catch the ferry in Oakland. The Jack London Square is Oakland's gateway to the Bay, where you go for gourmet food, jazz concerts, and of course the port itself is where we go through about 2.4 million TEUs of goods that ship through the port, whether it's coming to the United States or from our agricultural industries to the world. What I'm saying here is, if you live in the East Bay, the Port of Oakland really touches most of our lives, and that's what makes us everyone's port. It's my pleasure to serve as the executive director of the port at a very crucial time. I'm also an attorney and served as a port attorney for 11 years. And I'm also a former elected official, having served on the Oakland City Council and the East Bay Utility District. So it's very obvious that I'm very proud of Oakland. I know our town. I've worked hard for Oakland, and I look forward to working with you, the business community, and the communities around us to make the Port of Oakland even greater. So let's get down to the business of what's going on at the port. Obviously, dominating today and yesterday's headlines is this cruise ship that's pulled up to the port shore. As many of you know, the Grand Princess is docked at the port right now, the Outer Harbor Terminal, and it is a ship with some passengers or crew who have tested positive for the coronavirus COVID-19. Now, the Grand Princess outbreak is part of a state and national emergency, and the port was called on by our state and federal partners in responding to this emergency. So the state is facing an extraordinary public situation that requires urgent resolution, and we are proud to be part of the solution. But I look forward to the day we'll get to business as normal. And I want to make sure that people understand that we are an industrial port. We operate in an urban area, as illustrated by the discussion yesterday. And I think that I want to today advocate one point, which is that the city, as we plan, and business leaders in the community talk about business development, we need to keep in mind that our base of our job is still industrial. I was talking to the mayor of San Leandro, who is very proud of her city's development of many people who work at home. And then she commented, yes, and people work at home because there's an airport nearby that they can fly out really easily. So as we plan the city, we need to keep in mind that our industrial base is here. As we do our land use planning, we need to provide for an industrial sanctuary, a place where industry can operate. As much as we want maybe to not think about it, industry sometimes is incompatible with residential use, It is incompatible with sometimes with entertainment visitors district where people reside and walk around. So as we plan the city, we need to really be mindful of providing that buffer so that we not only grow our tech industry in our residential areas where people can thrive, but also to provide that buffer where industry still thrives, where people work their middle-class jobs. Just remind you, at the port, there are people who does trucking, who unloads and loads ships, and who operates the airport, and people who run their restaurants. Those are the jobs that are the best, some of the best paying middle-class jobs in Oakland, and we need to provide for that space. So I want to stop here and say thank you for the Oakland Chamber, as well as the business community. And I'm here simply to carry the message that the Port of Oakland is here. We are every person's job and person's lives here in the Bay Area. And I want to make sure that as we think about business development, that we keep in mind that we need to preserve our industrial base. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. We appreciate that presentation and certainly your leadership at the port. I do want to also underscore the report that we'll be getting this afternoon regarding our sort of economic condition in Oakland and the region and the country. Does talk a lot about this need for manufacturing or the fact that we're losing some of our manufacturing base in this community. And if we want to continue to provide a variety of different jobs and a variety of different industries, we need to really focus in Oakland on an industrial lands policy. So I'm very proud and happy that you'll be championing that, and we can certainly work more closely with that as the port moves forward with the city. I want to now introduce our next spotlight presentation with Pradeep Kimani, who is the Vice President of Global Business Solutions for Blue Shield of California. We've talked about Blue Shield a little bit this morning and are very happy that they have come to Oakland, and I think they've happily come to Oakland. I was quoted last night, I think 65% of their employee base happens to live in the East Bay community. So hopefully this is a wonderful union of a community and its workforce. And we're certainly very proud of the commitment you've made and the way with which you've joined the Oakland community. So I'd like to bring up Pradeep, and he will be presenting more about Blue Shield. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Barbara, for the kind introduction and for the kind words for Blue Shield of California. I'm delighted and proud to represent Blue Shield of California today, and I want to thank the Oakland Chamber of Commerce for giving us the spotlight. I want to start off by first talking about our North Star of Blue Shield of California. We are here to create a healthcare system which is worthy of family and friends and sustainably affordable. We all recognize that healthcare is complex, but we don't have to make it complex. We want to keep it simple. So how are we going to do that? At Blue Shield, we have our 5 pillars, which we believe we can speak in the voice of the customer and make it customer-centric to simplify healthcare. First and foremost is creating a personalized, high-quality experience for all Californians. Secondly, serving more people for health insurance needs and care management here in the state of California. Number 3, being good financial stewards of our members' money and being financially responsible in terms of how we spend that money. Fourth is being a great place to work for our employees and making it a professional home away from home so that they can do meaningful work here for Blue Shield of California and the community and our members. And last but not the least is standing up for what's right, which is bringing in our reputation, our brand, and values to the forefront. So who are we? What are our values? I want to spend a minute on these 3 values of being human, honest, and courageous. Human beings respecting everyone, ensuring that we show empathy, we are our authentic selves, and obviously bring our mindset with the customer at the forefront. Honest means being ethical, holding the highest integrity standards, doing things the right way, and ensuring that we are very open and transparent. Courageous means becoming an industry leader to bring value, to innovate and to transform healthcare, and to be able to conquer our fear so that we can boldly venture out, challenge the status quo, and make the change which is needed. Now, I'm very excited. I'm part of one of those employees of the 70% which lives in the East Bay. I would say that we are now so excited and happy to be here in this great city of Oakland. We now have more than 1,200 employees who are now located at 601 12th Street. And this is our new corporate home, our professional home, as I mentioned. And the journey started actually back in 2019 when, as part of our coincidence of our 80th birth anniversary, we came up with our hashtag 80 for Oakland. And we brought this venture of introducing our employees to Oakland and Oaklanders to Blue Shield of California. And we conducted more than 120 events and have contributed to more than 3,000 volunteer hours, even before we have moved here into this location. We are also very thankful to the Oakland Chamber of Commerce for giving us the partnership to host a supplier diversity event so that we could introduce our businesses to local businesses here in Oakland. Now, we are also taking great action here in 2020. Very proud to announce that we have this Blue Sky program, a program which is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar program which is focused on teens to deal with mental health issues. This is also with Oakland Unified School District being one of our early partners. We now have 5 schools in the Oakland Unified District which are now part of this program. This is a program which is focused on middle school and high school students, and there are opportunities to bring in one-on-one therapy for students through this program, give them the opportunity to be giving the first aid training for educators to deal with these issues in schools, and last but not the least, also bringing in online resources to deal with mental health resilience. You already heard Mayor Schaaf talk about the contribution of $20 million, which Blue Shield of California announced this year to Governor Newsom's homelessness and behavioral health initiative. So very proud of that. And also extremely proud about our support to Oakland Promise, the very worthwhile college student support program, which is spearheaded by and championed by Mayor Schaaf. Lastly, we are also very delighted to create economic growth for the city of Oakland and the community we operate and live in. Very proud to say that last year we grew our supplier diversity spend with small and diverse enterprises by almost 125%. We spent close to about $40 million, representing 4.8% of our procurement spend with these small businesses. 69% of that spend is by women-owned enterprises. We are also now proud to release our first supplier code of conduct, a code of conduct which talks about our standards of ethical behavior, supplier diversity, support to the environmental sustainability, compliance, and ethics, and also bringing in our focus around other attributes which we want to hold our suppliers accountable as we live our values. We now also have our employees who are spending millions of dollars here, not only buying services for themselves, but also for Blue Shield of California. With that, I would like to again thank the Oakland Chamber of Commerce for inviting Blue Shield of California for this spotlight. And we are very proud to be a California company now based out of this great city of Oakland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. And again, welcome to Oakland, to Blue Shield of California. Maybe we'll just start calling you Blue Shield of Oakland. I wonder if anybody would mind that. We are going to make a slight scheduling change, and I hope folks who are watching are okay with that. We are going to flip Joe Garofoli, senior political writer with the San Francisco Chronicle, as well as podcast host, It's All Political, with Robert Sammons, and bring Joe up first to talk a little bit, change the tone a little bit, talk a little bit about what's happening in our go ahead, come on out. Yeah, it's okay. Our national political scene, obviously yesterday, I think is referred to as Mini Tuesday.
Yes,
right?
Big Tuesday. Yes.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about that and what happened and sort of the environment we find ourselves from the national political scene, and then certainly what will happen, or what we hope to happen, come November. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe. His bio is in the back of your program for your reference. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks, Barb. And thank you all for watching. It's good to be here. I felt like this is what Joe Biden was in the room last night when he gave his speech, and it was like in a small crowd because of our coronavirus and everything else. So we're replicating that here today. The one thing that the business community doesn't like, of course, is uncertainty, and the political world is all about uncertainty right now. But one place where there is some developing certainty is in the Democratic race for the nomination for the Democratic president. Joe Biden has taken sort of the inside lane on that after last night. He won 4 more primaries. And at this point, he is about 150 delegates ahead of Bernie Sanders. Sanders still could catch up, but the next several states are not ones that are going to be friendly to him. Ohio, Florida, Arizona, these are all states that he lost 4 years ago. And as Michigan showed last night, the folks who were gravitating towards Sanders last time are now going to Joe Biden. Joe Biden not only won African Americans, but he also did very well among white voters, and he did very well among working class white voters. So Sanders, one of the main reasons he said he would be a stronger candidate is he would bring younger voters in, and he would do better among working class white folks. But he's certainly bringing in the younger voters, but he's not doing as well with working class whites in the Midwest. So Biden is looking strong there. For the business community, that means it's very unlikely that there will be Medicare for all or even a push for it should Biden be elected president. And even if there is a Democratic House and the outside chance there's a Democratic Senate, because there just aren't the votes there for it. And Biden has never advocated for it. In fact, he wants people to be able to buy into Medicare for all and as a public option. And keep their own private insurance. So that is one level of certainty for many in the business community. Now, just because Biden, who is the chosen son of the Democratic establishment, looks like he's got the inside track, the nominee, that doesn't mean he's got the inside track to be the president. I'm constantly talking with folks in the Midwest and people are on the ground there, and the president remains strong. The national polls show his approval rating is down, but it's been creeping up over the last several weeks. If you talk to folks that, number one, he's the incumbent, and until the last several days, the macroeconomy has been strong. The stock market, unemployment rate among African Americans and Latinos is at record low levels, even though, as we all know, many people have to work 2 and 3 jobs to continue to exist in this economy. But the uncertainty comes in with coronavirus. And I know we've all talked about that a lot today. But that could, as we'll see, that could really cut at Trump's reason for being reelected, or his argument for being reelected. He's talked about, hey, the stock market's doing great. Your 401ks are doing well. But they're increasingly not over the last several days. If the market continues to tank, then that's going to be bad. And if the unemployment rate goes up, that will be difficult for Trump to make that argument. Just go back to 2008. John McCain, when he was running, and at the time we were starting to get into the Great Recession as that campaign was winding or reaching its climax. And McCain said, don't worry, the fundamentals of the economy are strong. That turned out to be a really tone-deaf argument. If President Trump were to continue to sound things like that and continue to downplay the effect of the coronavirus on the economy, that could spell problems for him as well. The effect, we should also talk about how here in the Bay Area, the virus is affecting us. Santa Clara has the largest number of cases in the state, and that, of course, is the home of Silicon Valley. Many people in Oakland, the Bay Area, the East Bay are traveling there. So this is going to affect the economy here, and it could have ripple effects. And it could affect how, again, that the unemployment rate among African Americans and Latinos, which is at record low levels, as more companies are cutting, if they start cutting back, if they start laying off people, the lowest level folks, of course, will be the first to be affected. The effect in Washington on this, the reaction is we're going to be playing out in several days. In fact, in several hours, we're going to see the Democrats are going to roll out their response to the coronavirus, and we're going to see the president's response. The president wants to cut payroll taxes, and that would likely be a temporary cut that would last through maybe the lame duck session, which was the end of the year after the election. That means that, of course, that would not bring relief to people who are laid off because they would not be paying payroll taxes. So the Democrats don't like that as much. And it would cost about $700 billion. There's also talk of delaying when we would have to pay our income taxes this year. Instead of April 15th, we might be able to push it back, and that could give a bump to some people. Again, that would, the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, says that could bring in maybe $200 billion. Again, Democrats not as fond of that, and so this will be another Pelosi-Trump battle to watch. Looking ahead to hear things in California for the next year, there's a couple of things to keep your eye on. Just this week, Scott Wiener, the state senator from San Francisco, reintroduced a bill that would loosen restrictions on building multifamily housing across California as a way to address the housing crisis. This one, he's tried this a couple times before. It has not gotten through the legislature, and mostly it's been sunk by suburban interests, suburban cities who say it would take away their ability to address the housing system, of their own housing system, and also take away the character of their neighborhoods. So, but he has adjusted this one in some way. He calls it, quote unquote, a lighter touch on this issue. It would you would be able to cities could cap the number of units that could be converted from housing to multifamily housing as a way to make it more palatable to them. We'll see if they bite on that. This was just introduced this week, so it's very early in the process. One other thing to keep your eye on at the state level, two other things I should say, is there will be a ballot measure to reform Proposition 13. It will not touch residential property. It will touch commercial property. That would some property, there was a study that said in the Bay Area, 56% of all Bay Area commercial properties haven't been reassessed in 20 years, and 22% haven't been reassessed since the 1970s, which was the time of the original Prop 13 was passed by voters. This would raise $11 billion if this were to pass, and commercial properties, the change would be commercial properties would be reassessed every 3 years instead of whenever they change hands, which is there's loopholes to get out of that. So that would raise $2.4 billion for just in the Bay Area alone, $11 billion statewide. And of course, one other thing to look out for is there is probably the most expensive ballot measure coming to the fall ballot would be one to reverse AB 5. That was the law that was passed last year that said people who work for Uber, Lyft, and other gig economy companies should be treated as employees and not as freelancers. There's all the gig companies, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, et cetera, are putting together at least $100 million to fight that on the ballot. And you'll be seeing plenty of commercials on that coming to all the screens in your life this fall. All right, I think I'm out of time. Can I hear some applause here? Come on. All 7 people in the room, let's go. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And for those of us who are watching diligently and enjoy presentations like Joe's just for the red meat of our political conversation, I appreciate his time today. I'm going to now introduce one of our economic speakers from Cushman Wakefield, Robert Sammons, who is the regional director. He is a returning economist to our economic summits because we so appreciate his time and valuable information. And I think we'll talk a lot about certainly what's been happening in our region and country prior to these sort of last unusual few weeks, and then sort of what we can hopefully expect going forward. I also want to remind everybody who's watching, if you do have conversations for Robert and our next economic presentation, Chris Thornburg, you can text them to 510-502-0254, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. Thank you very much, and thank you, Robert, for joining us today, and we'll take it from here.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Thank you.
Pass by. Awesome. I believe there is a clicker here. So yeah, a lot has changed over the past just few weeks. Part of me wanted to throw the whole presentation out and start all over again. But no, there's a lot here still that's very relevant and will be so going forward for the rest of this year and into the rest of the decade, quite frankly. But economic forces certainly have changed locally, nationally, globally. We're in a very different space than we were just a few weeks ago. No doubt the economy is going to slow. A lot of that is due to retail, tourism, travel of any kind, conferences, trade shows, you name it, they're being canceled left and right. We still see that going forward for quite some time to come. I know locally, some of our museums, the attendance is way down because of tourism, because of locals not coming out, restaurants, companies shutting down at least temporarily, people working from home. So a lot of the mom and pop locations, even chains and what have you, have been severely curtailed in the business they're doing right now, whether it's in San Francisco or many other markets around the world. But more importantly, and we'll get to this in a minute, is that we've really created this bifurcated economy, right, in the Bay Area specifically, where we have those that have and those that have not. And a lot of those that have not, that are lower income people of many stripes, are moving away from the Bay Area, and that's stinging us fairly hard right now in the Bay Area specifically because of the cost to live here. And I'll go forward, and I don't know, let's see if we can get the clicker. Do we know if this is the clicker? Yes. Yes, okay. Here we go. Fantastic. So let's look at job growth and unemployment rate to begin with. And if you look across the entire Northern California region, it looks pretty amazing. I mean, right now, the latest data that we have, San Francisco, San Mateo County Metropolitan Division, a 1.9% unemployment rate. That's amazingly low, historically low figures. Alameda, Contra Costa County Metropolitan Division, a 2.9% unemployment rate. So basically what we have right now across the region is full employment. That's fantastic news. But we are having struggles regarding in-migration and labor force growth. If we just step back a little bit and look at labor force growth in the Oakland Metropolitan Division for 2018, that jump was 1.5%. For 2019, it was just 0.2%. So we're not importing people. We're not importing or growing the labor force in this market any longer. The same really goes for San Francisco, which had dynamic labor force growth just a year ago. In 2018, it was up 3.3%. For 2019, it was down to less than 1%. So that's a real issue going forward. We're just not having the number of people we need to do the jobs that exist in this market. Whether they're tech level jobs, those are still being more or less imported into the region, but not as strongly as they were just a few years ago, or those non-tech jobs, even professional services jobs. A number of those are leaving the Bay Area, and probably for good. Just one more note on this slide. Over the past decade, the region, the Bay Area, the core Bay Area, gained over 800,000 jobs. That's huge, huge number. I mean, that's essentially about adding the entire population of San Francisco as far as new jobs go. Crazy number. Very quickly, as far as the office summaries, this is my specialty, what we're talking about office markets across the region. San Francisco now has the highest average asking rent of anywhere in the country, including Manhattan. and it has the lowest vacancy rate of any market in the country. And that does, again, include Manhattan, many other markets, Austin, you name it. A very tight market. That's pushing companies to look elsewhere outside of San Francisco. That's why they're looking in Oakland currently and other areas around the region, but also outside the region. And we're going to get back to that very important part in just a minute. But you see the Oakland CBD asking rent and vacancy rate. The vacancy rate has ticked up recently because of the new product that has been added to the market, but also because of that new product, which is essentially trophy Class A. The average asking rents have climbed pretty dramatically, similar to what's going on in San Francisco. So the CBD, all classes, average asking rent is almost $65 a square foot, unheard of just a few short years ago for Oakland. So a dynamic number, certainly. But it's also causing other companies to look maybe beyond Oakland that have been in San Francisco that may want to go elsewhere, maybe looking for even less expensive markets outside the region to move to. Very briefly, let's look at R&D. R&D doesn't get all of the flash that the office market or even sometimes the industrial market gets. R&D, just quickly defined as buildings up to 3 stories, 3 sides of glass, a mixture of office and manufacturing. There are a number of products in this range, a lot of life science buildings in this market, in Alameda and Emeryville, that are qualified or classified as life science or R&D buildings. This market, again, is very tight. It's much less expensive, but I have to note that these rents that you see here, $21 a square foot for Oakland, for instance, those are triple net rents. So you have to kind of gross them up and realize they sound a lot less than they actually are once you gross those numbers up. So what's going on as far as new construction goes? Well, we've had a good bit of it over the past decade, but certainly that's slowed across the region. In San Francisco, we just don't have that much right now under construction. There's a lot proposed. Central Soma is going forward, but a lot of that is not going to be delivered until 2023, 2024, 2025. Again, that's another aspect of what's going on in San Francisco, pushing tenants to look at markets where there are deliveries, where there is vacant space, including Oakland right now. You see the number for the East Bay is very minimal, although there's a lot of products on the horizon. And again, 21, 22, 23, those years. 73 total buildings, office and R&D under construction. 65% of that is pre-leased, meaning a great look ahead over the next few years. Tenants are aware of what's going on in the market, but they want to pre-lease space, get ahead of the curve a little bit, beat maybe the competition. And beyond what's under construction, there's 83 million square feet within the region that is proposed. A lot of that actually is going forward, and we'll probably see that move into the under construction category later this year. So who are the corporate users? Who are the big players? I think we know a lot of the names. We hear them every day, certainly in San Francisco and down the peninsula and into Silicon Valley. But the market in the East Bay is still very different. That tech movement really hasn't made it strongly into the East Bay yet. I think we're going to see it going forward. I think you're going to see a lot of these big players that have been in San Francisco, that have been in Silicon Valley. Certainly a lot of the life science players move more into the East Bay. Less expensive, availability of space, a big reason for that. Certainly transit-oriented developments, very popular across the region. And that's where Oakland and the East Bay shine because of BART, quite frankly. And a lot of the employees work or live in the East Bay. So it's a lot easier for them to commute to work if, say, their company is based in Oakland or other areas of the East Bay. Again, though, it's really about transit-oriented development. It remains about transit-oriented development. If you're walking or biking distance from a BART station or a Caltrain station, those products are doing much better than those that are not. And this transit effect map that we put out, an update every quarter, really kind of proves that out, whether you're in downtown Oakland or downtown San Francisco or on the Caltrain line, walking or biking distance from a Caltrain stop along the peninsula. Your product, your office product, your industrial product, if indeed there is an industrial product on the peninsula, for instance, or anything, multifamily, retail, generally does very well if you're walking or biking distance to a Caltrain, to a BART stop. What's going on in multifamily, and I'll touch on this briefly because this isn't necessarily my sweet spot, but it does directly affect what goes on in the rest of the sectors. And we are certainly playing catch up. We've been playing catch up for a decade. We're doing better, but probably in the next year or two, it will pull back a little bit more. It's just so expensive to build housing in this market. That's a big part of the reason why it might slow down. And there are a lot of NIMBYs still, not in my backyards. That still exists across the Bay Area, and it so just becomes much more difficult to build in this market. Again, land costs, construction costs, poor planning and coordination between municipalities, and that NIMBYism still exists. Pricing is steep, but it's not rising as fast due to that increased construction delivery pipeline, at least over the next year or two. So what drives this market? A big surprise, it's tech, right? And venture capital funding is something we watch very closely. If we compare the US versus the Bay Area, the numbers are striking. 41.6% of the funding is in the Bay Area compared to the entire US. And over the past decade, the percentage topped out at 43.3% in 2018. It was as low as about 34% back in 2010. But you see this drives the Bay Area, and not just San Francisco, not just Silicon Valley, but the entire Bay Area. The number of deals in the Bay Area compared to the entire US, about a quarter of all the deals that were done in the US were in the Bay Area. Striking number again. It's been slightly higher. I think the number is going to fall. We had some huge funding rounds last year, some big IPOs that occurred just behind that. And so what we're probably going to see is a pullback, not just because of issues within the greater economy, but because of those huge IPOs last year. So the actual volume will probably pull back, and certainly funding numbers will probably pull back slightly, but still be extremely strong. So let's go to Oakland, and I'm jumping around a little bit. I'm gonna drill down to Oakland, and then I'm gonna pull back out to the entire U.S. to give you an idea of where Oakland stands with the rest of the U.S. Right now, this is the entire metro area of Oakland, so this includes, down the bay a little bit and out further a little bit as well. But you can see it's the same trend as it will be in the CBD, as you'll see in a second. The vacancy rate has ticked up because of new product deliveries, not yet occupied, although I think they will be over the next couple of quarters. But what you can see that is so striking is the increase in the average asking rent, jumping dramatically. That pricing is really due to those trophy products delivering, and also that they are transit-oriented developments. I know I'm pushing that. I sound like a broken record, but that is incredibly important in this market and many other markets around the country right now. And those are commanding higher rents than anything else on the market today. And let's look at the CBD. Let's specify the CBD. Now, you're sitting on top of two, some may say three BART stations within the core CBD market of Oakland, and those numbers are even higher. Your rents are at a record high, up 122% over the past decade in downtown Oakland. New construction now pencils out. We're going to see in a minute that there are a lot of new deliveries coming down the pipeline over the next 3 to 5 years. But vacancy is back in the double digits. New deliveries, though tenants in the market have increased, particularly from San Francisco and Silicon Valley, although we're going to see in a minute they're looking elsewhere, not just at Oakland necessarily, across the bridge or through the tunnel any longer. They're looking at other markets as well. So what has happened historically for San Francisco versus Oakland? And you can see here the huge number for Class A CBD direct average asking rents in San Francisco, now over $90 a square foot. Obviously a record high number, and the highest in the United States right now. Here, it's grown as well. I mean, just over the past year in the CBD, it's gone from about $59 a square foot to $65 a square foot in the core market. So it's a huge jump. There's still a big difference, a big delta between San Francisco and Oakland, but it hasn't really changed that much. If you go back historically, you look at those numbers over the past 4 or 5 years, it really hasn't changed that much, that delta. But you know, that's again another reason why people are looking at other markets. Within the Oakland CBD, have we got recent office migrations from San Francisco? Absolutely. And a lot of people know these names: Square, Blue Shield, Credit Karma, Delta Dental, on and on. There have been some big moves from San Francisco to Oakland. But I just want to let you know, like over the past, we've looked back at all the relocations out of San Francisco recently. Of the last 30 relocations out of San Francisco, and this is generally 5,000 square feet and greater, 12 were to Oakland. So that's 40% of those 30 relocations were into Oakland from San Francisco. But if we take more recent data and we look at the last 15 that have occurred, say about mid-year last year through the first quarter to date of 2020, only 5 went to Oakland. So that's down to about 33%. And those deals range from 50,000 square feet or so up to 250,000 square feet. Recently, we've had Stripe relocate to South San Francisco, for instance. Macy's.com looking to go to both New York and Atlanta. Affirm, Collective Health going to other markets outside the Bay Area. They're going to Dallas, they're going to Austin, they're going to Denver, Chicago, Atlanta, Nashville. But they are looking for where the talent lies. They're not just looking necessarily at cheaper, they're looking at where they can find talent. And in some of these markets, certainly they can find the talent. Certainly they can find it in Oakland and in the Bay Area, but cost of living, cost of doing business is high, and they're looking and comparing the markets and seeing what really pencils out best for them. Some of the big players are certainly going to New York. They're going to DC. They're going to those types of markets too. They're spreading the wealth, if you will. And I think that's really going to be continuing to be the case for the rest of this year and into next year. But what's being built in Oakland and what's driving tenants to this market, it's new product. And that's something this market hasn't seen in over a decade. 601 City Center delivered last year. Uptown Station delivered last year. And then we have a couple of buildings also, 2150 Webster, 1100 Broadway, all doing incredibly well right now. And then going forward, what we have are planned nearly under construction buildings, whether it's Beacon Tower, 2100 Valley, both entitled, 2100 Telegraph, also being reconfigured, if you will, and a couple of unentitled projects that will probably be announced, more announcements to come on those projects over the next few months. So a lot of new product, much more so than ever before really seen in decades in this market, which will change it dramatically. I think too, and this is just really quickly, just the construction pipeline map to kind of give you an idea of where those projects are. And again, they're near BART. They're walking distance to BART. They are in the core of the market. They're in a mixed use area where there is a lot of retail and honestly a lot of new residential construction, which is really pushing this forward more than anything else, to be honest. What's happening on the investment side? I think what we wanted to do is take one project, Uptown Station, 1955 Broadway, and see how that's changed. That product has turned over 4 times, basically, or will be turning over a 4th time very soon. And you go back to 2014 or so, and that was less than $100 a square foot that it traded for. You take a year later, it traded for over $300 a square foot. You go forward to 2018, it traded for almost $500 a square foot, and it's soon probably to trade for over $1,000 a square foot. That was unheard of just a few short years ago. It's got a great tenant. It's got an amazing location sitting on top of a BART station. It's got retail, it's got restaurants, it's got all the things that everyone likes. And so it's hitting all the buttons for everyone. But if you take all the products, all the office products that have kind of hit over the past decade, if you go back to 2012 at least to 2020, office appreciation on a per square foot basis has increased 147% in Oakland. Just an amazing number and an amazing turnaround for this market. It is a huge competitor to San Francisco now, a huge competitor to Silicon Valley, and it's at the right place, really at the right time. Going forward, we're going to look at market tenant requirements. They remain very strong, about 1.25 million square feet of tenants in the market, A lot of those are big players. Almost 50% are looking for 50,000 square feet or more in this market. But a lot of those are life science players too. They're looking to expand or move into this market, whether it's Oakland or if it's Alameda or if it's Emeryville. They're looking in those areas to expand their business. But you also see about the requirements by industry. A lot of those are professional services still. We do see life sciences in there, but down the line you see hardware and tech. They haven't been huge in pushing themselves into this market yet. I think what we're going to see probably over the next few years is a big push from tech companies looking at this market hard. There have been a couple that have done well here recently, including Square, and I think we'll see more of that. So quickly, the multifamily spotlight, as I mentioned, just an amazing change over the past few years. Some 13,900 units underway, essentially. That's in 66 projects. Most of those are in the core of the market. This is the big change. This is really what has spurred office development. It's spurred, the residential growth in this market. It's spurred all of the retail activity downtown. And this is what's going to continue to drive this area for the next 5 to 7 years probably. All of this incredible growth. Now, is it everything we need? It's mostly luxury housing, again, just like it's been in San Francisco, just like it's been on the peninsula and down in Silicon Valley. We need more of a mix of price ranges probably. Will we get that? The problem is it's so difficult to pencil out that. It's the construction costs are so high, the land costs are high, as I mentioned. So it's become a real issue going forward as to how we bring in the lower income housing to these developments or to other developments in the area. That's going to be the trick going forward. I mentioned venture capital funding for the entire Bay Area. I wanted to look at Oakland and the VC-backed companies headquartered in Oakland right now. In 2019, we saw, and this is for the city of Oakland, we saw a record volume, $802 million and 110 deals in VCs. That's up from 2018 pretty dramatically. The initial numbers for Q1 2020 are $155.8 million in 10 deals. And some of the biggest ones you see there, it's financial software, consumer finance. Those fields are doing incredibly well in this market in particular. And again, it's financial software, food tech, business software. Those are the sweet spots for this market thus far. And again, these are companies headquartered here. These aren't just expansions of companies based elsewhere. So these are homegrown companies, and that's very important to note, very important to watch going forward. So I told you I wanted to kind of pull back again and look at how Oakland, and especially the Oakland CBD, compares to the rest of the U.S. It's not just competing with San Francisco anymore. It's competing with other markets around the country. And again, companies, especially tech companies, but professional services firms too, they're chasing talent. They're not just looking at lower costs, but kind of the ease of doing business. That's their priority right now, the continuity of them doing business. And you see a couple of important facts here. The biggest one really is the average asking rent. Certainly it's much lower than San Francisco, as we've mentioned. But if you look at some of the other markets, it's still even a bit higher than Austin. We hear Austin, Austin, Austin all the time about all the growth that's going on in that market. But if you look at the Austin CBD, the average asking rent at the end of the fourth quarter was $56.40 a square foot, full service. And that's less than the Oakland CBD. And then you look at other markets. You look at take D.C., for instance, Washington, D.C., $55 a square foot. Atlanta, which has garnered a lot of attention from tech firms, $27 a square foot average asking rent now. So over, basically half or more than half the Oakland rate right now. Dallas, who has gotten a lot of attention as well. Chicago, a lot of growth in the tech field right now. It's still a lot less expensive with a huge talent base. So this is where your competition is coming from. It's not just across the Bay in San Francisco. It's from all these other markets that are getting a lot of attention from tech firms and others where there is talent. This is going to be very important for Oakland to watch. The competition is strong and will continue to be so, and certainly something to be aware of going forward for this market. Very quickly, there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of job growth. There's been a lot of population growth in this market. You look at the Metropolitan Division of Oakland, that's Alameda and Contra Costa counties. The population's grown over the last decade over 11%. Job growth has been over 20%. But then you compare that to San Francisco, where job growth is up 37%. The real kicker to me is, again, we go back to Austin here, and really the Texas markets in general. Austin population growth was 32% over the past decade, and their job growth was over 40% over the past decade. Just phenomenal numbers for those markets. But still very strong, solid numbers for Oakland and for San Francisco, for the entire Bay Area. But it bears watching, and we have to compare ourselves not just to other Bay Area markets now. Oakland has to compare itself to other markets around the country. Very briefly, again, strong job growth. The most important note on this slide really is that over half the year-over-year job growth in San Francisco, for instance, was the office sector, higher paying jobs. Interestingly, that was followed by San Jose, Denver, and Oakland. Oakland Metropolitan Division office jobs grew 40% over the past year. That's an incredibly large number. Again, that's probably due to a lot of the move-ins in the CBD and the office side. And that's a very important metric to note, and probably we'll see more of that going forward. We wanted to look here at jobs at all tech companies and going forward over the next 5 years, and this is a forecast from Moody's and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you'll note here that Oakland tech job growth over the next 5 years is about 3.4%, which doesn't sound like that much, but then you compare it to, say, San Jose, which is almost all tech jobs at this point. The job growth is expected to be about 2.8% over the next 5 years. San Francisco is 6.3%. You see a lot of less expensive markets, Austin, Orlando, Houston, Vegas, Dallas, on that, and at much higher job growth levels. But still, a 3.4, 3.5% level over the next 5 years. That's not too shabby for this market. So just wanted to quickly wrap up. You know, there's a lot of things we could talk about on this. The Bay Area, the economies here are so interconnected these days, much more so than ever before. I think we all have to kind of work together. Tech wants to expand further. It's all about finding the talent. It's all about labor force growth. It's all about cost of living and cost of housing specifically. We're the highest cost of living market in the U.S. Transit has its challenges for sure. We have social issues. Our immigration has slowed. And right now we're dealing with the coronavirus, which is affecting our ports and tourism and retail and events. And we just don't yet know where that's going to go. On the plus side, for Oakland and specifically, there are so many physical and psychological changes that have gone on in Oakland, and I'm proud to say that this market is so completely different than it was even a decade ago, and so much better. There's so many new office developments approved and that will move forward this year. Cranes are everywhere, mostly due at this point to the residential construction. Investors are really looking hard at this market for long-term holds. The convenience to San Francisco, the core CBD, the transit-oriented development is going to be huge going forward. So with that, I'll wrap it up and turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Again, thank you for the information and your time. And for those that are also watching on the live stream, remember that this, upon completion of the program, you will be able to review this presentation and any other presentations from today's activity on our YouTube channel. So it allows you to study further on what was been presented today. I want to now bring up Felipe Chacon, with Square. He is an economist with Square. Square obviously is a new member of the Oakland's economic ecosystem. They have moved about 300 employees currently into the Uptown Station building, but for those of us who have been in Oakland for decades, we actually refer to it as the old Capwell's building. And it has had a few iterations since that time, but now it is in fact occupied by our partners at Square, which we very much appreciate. 95% of those employees actually live in the East Bay, which is a theme today, obviously connecting people closer to their homes and their work, which we really appreciate as well. And again, like Blue Shield of California mentioned earlier, Square has moved in with a tremendous focus outward to the community and to the Oakland, to our Oakland partnerships to ensure just a continued and strong bond between Square and the Oakland community going forward, which we, of course, are very proud of and very much appreciate. So I will turn it over to Felipe now, and he will have his 10-minute spotlight, and then we'll move forward with the program. Thank you.
Hey, and thank you for the introduction. Let's make sure this works here. I'm really excited to be here, and I know this wasn't quite the setup that people had imagined about a week ago, but we're adapting and things are going well. So this is the first time that Square has been able to take part in one of these economic summits hosted by the Oakland Chamber. And with that in mind, we just kind of wanted to give you guys an overview of who we are and what our footprint looks like here in Oakland. So to kick it off, Square's purpose is simply economic empowerment. So a lot of you probably know us as the company that provides the little white Square readers that vendors can use to process credit card transactions. And that was definitely the case 11 years ago when we really started getting going. And business at the time, it was really only larger businesses that could accept credit card payments. Since that time, today, we've built out a number of tools to help out small businesses, to help them to accept credit payments both online and in store. And we've additionally built out tools to help business owners manage their business and more recently gain access to capital, which we're really excited about. So if you're not a business owner, we also offer the Cash App. And with that Cash App, you can spend money, you can transfer it, you can store it, and you can even invest it now. So we do have a truly global reach, and we process payments from sellers all over the United States. There we go. We process payments from sellers all over the world, and especially here in the United States. And what you're looking at here is 1 minute of card payment transactions on the morning of February 13th of this year. And this includes transactions from medical practitioners, photographers, food trucks, charitable organizations, grocery stores, and veterinary services. I mean, you name it, and somebody's using Square to process a transaction. I guess kind of related to this point, we do want to acknowledge coronavirus and the effect that it's already having on people and businesses. Right now, it's a little early for us to say anything high level or to have any high level takeaways on the impact that it's having, but we are proactively reviewing our payments data and are staying on top of it. So let's talk a little bit more about Oakland specifically. So the Oakland economy, as it's been noted, has been really strong lately. Over the past 5 years, employment in the city of Oakland has grown by over 12%, and this has outpaced the state growth rate for employment. And during this same time, we've seen a 45% increase in the number of small businesses using Square. We now have over 4,000 small businesses that use Square on a regular basis here in the city of Oakland. They have processed, in the past 5 years, they've processed $46 million in transactions. And this is translated, it's been a 180% increase in the gross payment volume that we've seen, and a corresponding 166% increase in the number of transactions that we've seen over this time. The types of businesses that we see using Square here in Oakland, there's a strong presence of medical service providers, 11.1%. A lot of beauty and barber shops are using Square here. We got taxis and limos, a lot of food trucks, restaurants, retail establishments. Maybe a couple things that are of interest here. Oakland actually over-indexes on the medical service providers that use Square here in the city relative to the national average. A lot of that, I think, is because of the dynamic kind of healthcare services that are offered here in the city of Oakland. The flip side of that coin, there are fewer beauty and barbershops available here in Oakland that use Square relative to what we see nationally. So I don't really know where everybody's getting their haircuts. Earlier this year, we did a survey of our Square sellers here in the city, and 36% said that their business had been here in Oakland for more than 12 years, so it's a very established business community. 86% of the business owners themselves consider themselves long-term Oakland residents. On top of those stats, 28% said they chose to start their business here in Oakland for the sense of community, and another 19% noted the strong customer base. So there's definitely a strong desire to root businesses here in Oakland, and for reasons that go kind of beyond the traditional reasons to start a business, and surveys like this echo that sentiment. Another data point we pulled from that same survey was that 16% of sellers said they needed support in gaining access to capital. To that end, Square here in the East Bay has offered more than, as of November 2019, had more than $200 million in capital loans available on the table for sellers that needed them. Those that are accepting these loans are taking out an average loan of $11,400, which is a perfect small business loan. For a little bit of context around this number, the national average is about $6,500. So that's, again, a reflection of the high costs. This is a high-cost city in a high-cost state, and I think sellers or vendors are eager to take advantage of the capital being offered to them here. And so kind of closing out, I mean, lastly, that's a little bit about our sellers, but as we've heard, Square just opened an office here. We couldn't be more excited to be a part of the community. There are about 300 of us here, and we kind of come to you with 3 areas of focus that we landed on after over a year of meeting with community members, meeting with stakeholders, and those are to preserve culture here in Oakland, support the small business community, and provide economic opportunity for Oaklanders. And so to that end, one of the decisions that we made based on these areas of focus was to not include a full kitchen in the office that we opened here, so we will be joining you for lunch. And there's about 300 of us here in downtown Oakland. As an FYI, the peak minute for lunch transactions on the average weekday here in Oakland is 12:19. So if you're looking to avoid the rush, either come before or after that, at some point give yourself, plan accordingly. That's pretty much all I have. Thank you again. We look forward to participating in the community, and we'll be seeing you around.
Can somebody go find Chris? Yeah, good. Okay. Thank you very much. I want to underscore the importance of what Felipe said about having the decision to not have an internal commissary or encourage employees to go out into the community. I think it is one of the things that, for those of us who have been in Oakland a long time, has been transformative, particularly in Uptown, when businesses come in and make that decision, because there is so much activity during the lunch hour and after work. I refer to it as the turkey sandwich effect, because I think it's really important, or the cocktail effect, depending upon your age, I guess just your age, decade. And I think it's a really important decision that you made, and we appreciate it, because it really does create support for our local small businesses that right now, actually more than probably weeks ago, are going to be suffering with a lot of short-term and long-term impacts. I want to introduce somebody now who pretty much needs no introduction for those of you who follow the Chamber's work. We started the economic data report about 5 years ago in partnership with the City of Oakland, and obviously in partnership with Beacon Economics, as a way to really provide our members and our policymakers with a documented information that allowed decision-making driven by data. So we could talk about what was happening in our community, not only across the city, but in discrete districts, our discrete council districts, so people really understood sort of the economics behind our ecosystem, our economic ecosystem, our jobs base here in Oakland. And there's nobody better to make that presentation and to provide us that local glimpse, as well as obviously our regional and state and federal glimpse, which Chris will do, than Chris Thornburg. So I'm going to bring Chris up. He's going to take it from here, and that will close out our day. But for anybody, again, who would like, no, go ahead and come up. For anybody who would like to ask questions of Chris, because we know this is one of the popular topics of the day, particularly when we talk about our local ecosystem, 510-502-0254, and we'll try to answer as many questions throughout the presentation. And since we're on schedule, unintended consequence of this particular way with which we're providing the venue today, we'll be able to probably get to some questions. So thank you very much, and welcome back, Chris.
Thank you very much, Barb. Good morning, everyone. It is certainly interesting times, and of course, we were here, of course, to talk about the ongoing trends here in the city of Oakland, district by district. For those of you out there, hopefully you've had a chance to go through the report that we have been producing with Barb over the last couple of years. Again, this is a truly unique product. Of course, it's something we're able to do on the basis of really unprecedented access to data that simply wasn't available 10 years ago. So we do hope you enjoy that publication and the information herein. But of course, what I'm here to talk about is a little bit about the broader economy, the California economy, the East Bay economy, the Oakland economy, and then give you some of the broad highlights on a district by district basis. First and foremost, panic, right? Now, obviously today the big concerns have to do with the coronavirus, but panic is certainly nothing new in our economy. Indeed, over the last year and a half or so, every time you turn around, there's yet another panic point. Real estate markets are going to collapse. We have rising interest rates and inflation. We have the Chinese trade war, and it goes on and on and on. In fact, in many ways, the coronavirus is just another panic point in a year and a half of a national mental meltdown at some level. But I thought I'd be a little careful here. You know, for well over a decade, Beacon Economics has been very bullish on the U.S. economy, very bullish on the California economy. I have largely poo-pooed, if you will, a lot of the big fears that you've seen create turmoil in the markets across the United States. But on this one, we are actually taking a step back. There was a lot of concern out there, and we're going to tip into a little bit about what this all may mean for the economy. What I think is most important for everybody out there right now is to understand that we're still whistling in the dark. At this point in time, we have very little data as to which to gauge just what this is going to mean for the current U.S. economic expansion. Now, I would tell you, up until this point, the economy's been just fine. Calls for a recession really began in earnest well over a year ago, the beginning of 2019, for all the reasons already noted. But again, it's worth noting, over the course of 2019, none of those fears came to pass. In fact, right now, up until, of course, this issue, the U.S. economy, candidly, is close to the strongest it's been in 30-plus years. Overall GDP growth in the United States, very much Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold. Good, steady consumer spending, supported by, again, some of the best consumer fundamentals we've seen in 30-plus years. Housing markets, a year ago, we were told they were going to melt down. They're already bouncing back. Labor markets remain incredibly tight. In fact, too tight. Labor shortages are becoming an acute problem really across the United States, but of course, particularly here in California. You think about wages, they continue to rise despite rumors to the contrary. And of course, one issue with this panic has been an enormous rally in the bond market, and in a very real sense, these ultra-low interest rates will create a little bit of a boost for the economy, hopefully enough to offset some of the issues having to do with the pandemic. Now, we still are not calling for the end of this particular recession. We do not see any specific reason to call a recession in the near future. However, the risks are clearly rising. The wild card, of course, is that global pandemic. Now, with all the good news for the economy, it's also worth noting that this is not some sort of ringing endorsement of the current administration's policies. The economy has slowed over the last couple of years, despite the fact that we've had significant monetary and fiscal stimulus. Some of these issues are exogenous, whether we're talking about a slowing global economy, low oil prices, weak corporate profits, but some are, of course, endogenous. When you think about, for example, the trade disruptions driven by trade policy here in the United States, clearly that's an administration decision. And the labor shortages have been intensified by the clear anti-immigrant sentiment put forward again by this particular administration. So some is internal, some is external, but clearly things have slowed down just a bit. But for us, the problems still remain long run. where in this midst of this growing political extremism, in the run-up to this election where the U.S. economy seems paralyzed by political differences, we are truly squandering a wonderful opportunity to take on some of our long-term problems. We're too busy fighting about problems that don't exist to pay attention to the ones that truly do, and ultimately that will come back to haunt us. Now, as for the pandemic, we have to talk a little bit about that. You know, there's an old expression in economics, beware the black swan. Now, the term, of course, black swan comes from the fact that for hundreds of years, scientists simply assumed that all swans were white. That was just how the world worked, until, of course, explorers found Australia, and lo and behold, in Australia, there are indeed swans who happen to be a different color. In fact, they are black. The point of this is that a lot of times we assume, or simply assume, that there are no extreme events, or the probability of extreme events are much lower than they actually are. And in a very real sense, you think about this pandemic coming out of the blue, this is a true black swan. It's an unexpected event. Now, I'm not going to go through all the numbers. You've heard quite a bit about it. But I think what is probably most worthwhile keeping in the back of your mind is that we are still at the beginning of this. The overall number of cases worldwide is probably 110,000, even with the lack of testing, maybe still less than 200,000. To put that in context, in a typical year, 150 to 300 million people have the flu. So this is still small. It has the potential to become very, very large. And in a very real sense, how far this goes will determine whether or not this ends its expansion. The way to think about recessions is very simple. Recessions don't just happen. Recessions have to be caused by a large negative shock to the system. And that shock has to have three characteristics. Large, we've already talked about, but it also has to be rapid and it has to be sustained. Right now, what we know is this is a rapid shock to the system. It's come out of left field. Nobody knows exactly where it came from. We know where it came from, but it's very sudden. Nobody expected this. Nobody built this into their models. But it is not yet large, nor is it necessarily sustained. So we're still sitting at the edge, seeing just how far this gets. And in a very real sense, the policy choices, the personal choices we make over the next few weeks will determine exactly what this means for the ongoing expansion. So let's just get into some basic overview of numbers. 2019 was a perfectly reasonable year. Overall, we had about 2.3% growth. Good, steady numbers, a little bit slower than the previous 2 years. Now, overall consumer spending remained one of the strong points for the U.S. economy, adding a little less than 2%, the same as the last couple of years. What slowed our economy down in 2019 was a pullback in business spending. Now, that's interesting, of course, because with the tax cuts and lower interest rates, one would expect an acceleration in business spending. But as we know now, of course, that fiscal stimulus program really didn't do much for the U.S. economy because of the way it was structured. And of course, some of the exogenous influences, not the least of which has to do with rising vacancy rates in some commercial property types, and of course, issues with very low oil prices. Well, that has trimmed some off of that business investment despite those other issues. But a little better numbers in trade, a little better numbers in government spending, and overall growth continues at a nice, steady pace. Now, consumers are incredibly important for so many different reasons. They are 2/3 of the U.S. economy. They are the keel on this particular boat. A healthy consumer makes most problems much less in terms of their overall size and scope. An unhealthy consumer means any potential wave can flip the boat. Right now, we need to understand the health of consumers, because where consumers are today will give us a lot of sense of how resilient the U.S. economy is going to be to the ongoing issues with the coronavirus. Well, here's the good news. Consumers are doing fantastic. Overall consumer spending continues to grow at about 2.5%. Now, that looks like a little bit of a slowdown, but keep something in mind. You want people to have their spending more or less in line with the overall U.S. economy. If consumer spending is growing faster than the U.S. economy, we're getting ahead of ourselves. If it's slower, it's going to be a drag to slow things down even more. Right now, it's right on par. And what's good is consumer savings rates actually continue to rise. Savings rates today are close to 8%. That's the highest they've been in 30 years. When you look at low interest rates, when you consider the fact that debt accumulation in the household sector has been relatively slow, financial obligations ratios, again, near an all-time low level. This is a very healthy consumer sector, and that gives me a lot of hope about our ability to withstand the overall impact of the coronavirus. Housing markets, as already mentioned, have started to bounce back. A year ago, yes, they were down, things were slowing, but then again, it's remembering at the end of 2018, mortgage rates got briefly up to 5%. And of course, a year ago, the markets were down 20%. Not a surprise, it took a little bit of an oomph out of the real estate markets, but they've already bounced back. both in terms of home price growth, which is yet again starting to accelerate, and of course overall home sales, which yet again has steadied. At the end of the last year, we saw a bounce in permits, which is good considering that vacancy rates in the U.S. economy are still near an all-time low record. More supply coming online is good news for this economy. Now, what's supporting consumer spending, healthy housing markets, of course, are very strong labor markets. Now, it is true the labor market growth has slowed. Right now, overall labor market growth in the U.S. is less than 1.5%. But then again, the unemployment rate in the U.S. is 3.5%. It's a 50-year low. To put that in context, over the last 2 years, the job openings rate has been above 4%. What that means is for 2 years running now, we've had more job openings than people looking for work. That is a big problem. But again, the problem we're seeing out there is not that workers can't find jobs. Workers have amazing job opportunities out there. The real problem is that jobs can't find workers. And of course, those openings do represent a problem for American businesses. Now, they represent, a lot of folks might be saying, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense to me. Every time I turn around, I hear about discouraged workers and people on the outside looking in. But again, that has a lot to do with more rhetoric about our economy and people trying to tell us that things are worse than they actually are. Take, for example, the U6 unemployment, which includes the underemployed and discouraged workers. By the way, that is close to the lowest it's ever been. The last time it was this low was back in 1999, when, by the way, we had a massive tech bubble ripping through the U.S. economy. This is the real deal. There really aren't discouraged workers out there. And yes, with very tight labor markets, wages are rising. Again, that monthly number that comes out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics is broken. Those statistics have all sorts of problems involved with them. Most economists who understand data, who understand the current population survey know this. And in fact, the Atlanta Fed guys know this. They do something called the wage tracker where they clean up the problems. And according to their data, since 2015, average real wage growth has been 4% and median has been 2%. Again, this is in real terms. These are the best numbers we've seen since the late 1990s. People are getting ahead. And remember, even this doesn't capture the increases in quality of life driven by technological changes that we all benefit from on a day-to-day basis. Now, we've heard a lot about the manufacturing recession. There's been a little bit of a slowdown in industrial production growth. Not that much. In fact, overall industrial production growth is only down about 1.5% on a year-over-year basis. This is a little less severe than what we saw back in 2015, when the industrial production also slowed down. That time, it was about a commodity bust in terms of big prices for declines of things. This time, it's a little bit due largely to the slowdown in the global trade, driven in part by a weak European economy and some of the problems between China and the United States. The good news is manufacturing orders have remained relatively steady, and we're already starting to see industrial production start to pick up. As for the trade war itself, when I was with you last year, I pretty much dismissed any kind of major problems coming out of that trade war, largely because when it comes to conflict between China and the United States really has all the cards in our hand. We're not a very trade-oriented nation because of Chinese trade policies. We've been running a very large trade deficit with them. Put that in context, a couple years ago, about 0.75% of the U.S. economy went to China. Over 4% of their economy came here. Clearly, they are more at risk. And of course, when it came to putting tariffs on Chinese products, the Chinese immediately allowed the yuan to depreciate close to 15%, picking up most of the tab. Indeed, the U.S. has been remarkably resilient through this. The best you could say about trade over the course of the last year is that trade's been flat. Real imports, real exports have been nice and steady through the course of late 2018, right through 2019. Yes, we're buying less from China. We're selling less to China, but we're simply buying and selling more with other parts of the globe. On net, very little has changed for the U.S. economy. A little bit of stress, but nowhere near as much as people have told us. Now, when you think about the slowdown in business investment, interestingly enough, it isn't really about equipment. It's not as much about manufacturing as people will have you believe. Indeed, if you break down the numbers in terms of business investment, it turns out the biggest slowing in business spending has a lot to do with commercial structures. And within that category, the biggest category of all is mining. Now, mining has been a problem for the U.S. because oil has been so cheap. And by the way, that's due to U.S. oil production. Now, if you heard the news lately, you realize oil prices briefly dropped below $30 a barrel. That's crazy low numbers, and it will yet again continue to put stress on this particular sector of the U.S. economy. On the other hand, it also means lots of cheap energy for U.S. consumers, which will be a little bit of a cushion for our overall economy. On this particular front, I think we're still in relatively good shape. I don't worry too much about it. Now, what about the virus? Where is this thing going to go? Now, as already noted, we're whistling in the dark right now. We don't have a lot of data. We're just starting to get a little dribs and drabs of information about what happened in February when this thing was kicking in. It's really now February where things are starting to get serious. And we won't get this data until into April and sometimes even in the beginning of May. So we're in wait-and-see mode. But we can think about it. We know, of course, cases are across the globe. They're popping up all over the place. Every day in the United States, more cases are rising. There was recently a very dismal report coming out of the state of Washington that they expect within a month or two, they may have upwards of 60,000 cases in that particular state because they're one of the first places that saw a big hotspot explode. But with that in mind, we have to remember these numbers are still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. When this gets into the 10 million, 100 million person range, that's when things become dangerous, and we still have an opportunity to get in front of it. It just isn't clear about how draconian we're willing to allow the government to be to prevent these things from happening. Now, there's two types of effects to think about here. There's what I call the demand effect, and there's the supply chain effect. The demand effect, of course, has to do with the fact that people are simply not traveling. I came up here last night in LAX, and it was a ghost town. The plane was 2/3 empty. People are canceling trips. Conferences are being canceled. Concerts are being canceled. We get that. Now, we've seen this before. Go back to September 11th, and of course, you saw a tremendous decline in airplane traffic in the couple of years afterwards. Keep in mind, we didn't see a recession after September 11th. In fact, the fourth quarter of 2001 was when the U.S. economy came out of the tech recession that began at the beginning of that particular year. In other words, while it is true people are going to spend less money on things like airlines and cruises, and that is a problem, at the same time, we've seen historically that people will spend money on something else. What might they spend money on? Well, that can depend. They may be spending a lot more on retail right now. They're going to be ordering meals into their homes, as the case may be. We know, of course, that hospitals and other parts of the economy will start to bounce back as we'll start to see a lot of increase in demand for their services as well. That isn't necessarily good news, particularly for people who need that help, but we got to remember that will go some ways in offsetting some of the pullback in overall consumer spending. Now, the other part of it is supply chain disruptions. And here, of course, yet again, we have to start talking about China. As we know, China was the center of this, and for many weeks, the Chinese economy has been shut down. Workers in China have simply not gone to factories, and as a result of that, you're seeing a slowdown in products coming out of China. Now, the real question is, how long does this go on? We hear all the time about just-in-time inventories, but in a lot of ways, just-in-time inventory has been highly over-exaggerated. And that is particularly true over the last year and a half, where a lot of companies have realized that you can no longer rely on global supply chains the same way you could, say, 5 or 6 years ago, not under this particular administration's regime of trade conflict. What that means, of course, is you have actually seen inventory pick up relative to sales in the U.S., and again, that gives us a little bit of buffer. Go back to what we said. This is all about how long of a shock. For something to cause a recession, it has to be rapid, it has to be large, and it has to be sustained. Right now, we're not sure about the large and the sustained, and that, of course, all goes back to how long does this last. Now, in terms of thinking about different parts of the economy, this is a graph that kind of gives you a sense of things. And what I want you to think about is the immediate places that have been hit. For example, arts, entertainment, accommodation, air transportation. These are actually relatively small parts of the U.S. economy. For example, if you think about hospitals in the United States, well, hospitals have more in terms of economic output than amusements, performing arts, air transportation, and accommodation combined. So in a very real sense, while you may have a hit on this part of the economy, other parts of the economy are going to be growing as there's a severe increase in demand for various sorts of health services and health product manufacturing. You're going to see a rebalancing of the economy. There's still going to be losses. People are still going to be hurt, and we have to pay attention to that. But with a shift from here to there, it isn't necessarily a recession causing. Now, some very brief policy thoughts for those of you thinking about what does the government need to do here. Well, there's two things the government needs to do. First of all, a little panic is good. Not too much panic, but a little panic is good. You want people to stay home. We shouldn't be going out and encouraging conferences to go on and conference centers and hotels to stay open and to encourage people to continue to go there. In fact, If you do that, if you worry about short-run revenues, you can actually increase the transmission of this, thus making the long-term hit that much more dangerous. You know, if you create a couple months of panic where everything shuts down, that's exactly the way we eradicate this, or at least control it in the short run, allowing the U.S. economy to bounce back in the second half of the year. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Make the right decisions now, even if it hurts right now, because that'll keep us safe in the second half of the year. As for the government itself in terms of policies, again, get in front of this. Discourage any kind of large-scale gathering. In fact, maybe even prohibit it. Look at a place like Disneyland, which is crazy busy because everybody thinks it's going to be quiet. That is a great place for, of course, this virus to get out of control. Shut it down. The idea here is if you contain it now, we can get out of this. The way to think about this, of course, is there's 3 different outputs. This is number of cases in time. Worst case scenario is we have an explosion of cases. It makes it very, very large. But of course, if everybody gets this in the next 2 months, it'll go away relatively quickly. But the damage to the economy, the deaths, the disruption will be profound. It'll be a very nasty downturn. If we make some modest efforts, we won't have as many cases, but it'll be extended for a long period of time. This too could be recession causing, not so much because of the size, but because of the duration of the overall shock to the system. Best case scenario, if you can keep this thing contained, and we still can, yes, we take a short-run hit, but we'll recover in the second half of the year. The way to think about this, if this coronavirus stays a major issue in the first half of this year, we're fine. No recession, a little bit of a slowdown, be a bit of an acceleration second half of the year. If the coronavirus is still a big issue in Q3, all bets are off, and we very well may have a recession starting in Q4 of this year that could extend into 2021. So the best case scenario, a little bit of panic right now, will do the world a whole bunch of good. Make the right decisions. Now, the Fed, of course, has been cutting interest rates already, not quite fast enough for the president. We just had an emergency rate cut. Between you and me, this is kind of silly. Look, we've already had a nice stimulative value coming out of the bond markets. With 10-year bond rates hovering at 0.5%, long-run rates are going to come down sharply. Mortgage rates could probably be below 3% if the bond markets stay where they are. That is plenty of stimulus. If you want government stimulus right now, the best place to go is to think about those businesses who could be hit in the short run. Loan guarantees for businesses, particularly smaller businesses, who need a bridge gap, something to get over the next couple months. That is what the government wants to do, to help those companies not have to lay people off, to weather the storm until the second half of the year when we can get in front of things. Again, that is a good way of doing things. Stimulating demand with payroll cuts, absolutely pointless, won't do a thing. Now, they do still have to cut interest rates. Why? Well, because the spreads are back into negative territory. Puts a lot of stress in the banking system. You got to bring short-run rates down when the long-run rates tell you have to do that. And that is what they're doing. So we applaud this, but it isn't a stimulative effort. Rather, they simply have to unwind that curve. And what about the stock market? Well, what about it? Yes, the stock market's going crazy. But then again, I already netted a year ago, the stock market was also going crazy about inflation and real estate markdowns and Chinese trade wars and everything else. The fact that they're panicking today is nothing new. This is the 7th major market sell-off in 10 years. The market is excessively volatile, and the best thing you can do is ignore the volatility. Now, yes, this is a little worse, but then again, this may be the first real shock to the system. But we don't know yet. There's a lot of uncertainty, and as a result of that, everybody is best off not selling into the downturn and then buying on the way up. That's the sucker's bet. Hold tight. We're going to get through this, and hopefully this is going to come back relatively soon. Now, in terms of job growth here in the state, like the United States, things have been slowing down, but here they're slowing down a little bit more dramatically. The reason for that, yet again, is labor supply. You know, the easy way of thinking about unemployment is this. High unemployment is bad, low unemployment good. Not quite. High unemployment is bad because workers can't find jobs. Low unemployment is bad because jobs can't find workers. And unfortunately, much of California, the problem is jobs can't find workers. In every one of these economies on the right-hand side of the screen, we're at or below record levels of unemployment. And yes, that includes the Oakland MSA. Currently, unemployment rate is below 3%. This is an incredibly tight labor market. You talk to most companies out there, the biggest problem they've been having over the course of the last year is filling positions. Now, yet again, let's talk about this in the context of the virus. This is good news because I can tell you, while hotels are going to see a dramatic decline in overall bookings, they're not going to be willing to lay people off right away. not in this kind of labor market. Not when you've struggled so hard to fill positions. You're going to maintain your labor force as long as you can, just because it's so tough to get people. So in a sense, that is actually a strength to get us through this next mess. But from a long-term growth perspective, obviously this is a big issue. Now, why do we have such tight labor markets? Well, people are not leaving because of a weak economy. Every metric tells us California continues to outperform the nation. California's share of national personal income still higher than it's ever been. Economic output growth here in the state has been faster than the state overall, starting since 2014. Good numbers, this is a healthy economy. The real problem we have is people are moving away. Now, the domestic numbers, of course, are pretty dramatic, 150,000 per year moving out. Now, if you throw in the international stuff, what you find, it breaks even. But nevertheless, no matter how you look at it, right now, population growth in California is the weakest it's been in well over 100 years. This is bad news. Now, everybody will tell you this is because we have an affordability crisis. And I've said it at this event before, and I'll say it again. This is not an affordability crisis. If you have an affordability crisis, what you're saying is there are millions of housing units for people to move in, but they just can't afford. We don't see that. We don't have lots of units that people can't afford to move into. In fact, everything says quite the opposite. We don't have any units for people to move into. And indeed, what that means is anytime any kind of unit comes available, there's a massive bidding war for it, and the highest income household gets that particular unit. Now, what's interesting here is those high-income households can afford those units. They're paying a price they can afford. And indeed, if you look at the share of housing cost burden households here in Alameda County, believe it or not, it has fallen sharply since 2011, particularly on the owned side, where back in 2011, something on the order of 38% of homeowners were housing cost constrained. Today, it's only 27%. If you look at renting units, same sort of trend. 53% were housing cost constrained in 2011. Today, it's 49%. So it has fallen. It's not going up. It's actually getting better. But remember why. It's because you have gentrification going on. The lack of supply means the high-income folks get to move in, but they push out the lower-income households completely out of the area. They're having to move farther and farther east for a job. Now, again, supply, supply, supply. If you look at housing units per capita, the share of overcrowded housing, the share of vacant housing, everything says California has a dramatic housing supply problem. And the solution to this is more supply. If you try to attack affordability, you hurt supply, and ultimately you don't move the needle. If, however, you get serious about expanding supply, that ultimately helps affordability. And for those who don't believe that, I would look at the great state of Texas, who builds lots and lots of housing, and by the way, have a very affordable housing market. That is a big source of their strength in that particular economy. Build it, people will come, and that will continue to support your local industries. And of course, what's interesting about the Bay Area is you know all the time, of course, that San Jose and San Francisco, two of the fastest growing economies in the state since the Great Recession came to an end. But the wrong answer as to why that is tech. Everybody says that. It's tech, tech, tech. The third fastest growing economy in the state has been the Inland Empire, and that is not a center of tech. In fact, it's very much a blue-collar economy. What do Inland Empire, San Jose, and San Francisco have in common? Housing. All three of these areas have built tremendous amounts of housing. And I appreciate that they still haven't built quite enough, but it's worth noting San Jose and San Francisco have developed more housing in the last decade than they did over the previous 20 years. They built it, and you've seen a very steady acceleration in the labor force, which has allowed those economies to really exceed. The East Bay, in contrast, which has historically been the home of new housing, has not seen that kind of growth. There's been a lot of problems getting permits off the ground here. And of course, what that means is that limited housing stock has to be fought over, not just by businesses here in the East Bay, but of course businesses in the East Bay and businesses in the West Bay. That is bad news for local businesses because obviously in a lot of ways those West Bay businesses, a little more well-heeled, can pay their people a little bit more. And as a result of that, you find more and more housing in the East Bay going to people who commute west on a daily basis. So local businesses have even a tougher time finding local people, and they in turn have to reach even farther east. Now, overall employment numbers here in the Bay continue to grow, although again, a little bit slower in the East Bay than in the West Bay, driven by a lack of housing and that housing competition. Now, you could still grow, but of course the area has to bring in commuters from other parts. And overall, we've seen 11% growth in commuters coming into the Bay Area. It's becoming more and more intense. And again, the solution to commuting, housing. Not affordable housing, housing in general. Got to bring it in. Now, tech is still doing great. We heard about that. No problems there. Non-residential investment has been doing good in the East Bay. Good, steady numbers here. But of course, what's interesting about this is you're building all sorts of new commercial real estate, but who's going to work in it? In fact, it's interesting. If you look at San Jose, Oakland, San Francisco, you've seen lots of net absorption in the Class A office space, but the Class B and C, negative net absorption. Yes, the new buildings are filling up, but at the expense of leaving the older buildings empty. That's one of the bigger issues out there. Who's going to work in those old buildings? What do you do about this? Well, maybe some of that stuff should be converted to housing. Now, let's get close to home. Let's talk about Oakland, because that's what we're here to talk about. And what have you seen in Oakland? Well, in a lot of ways, Oakland is in the midst of a renaissance. We know that. This city is in the midst of probably one of the strongest economies it's been in a very long time. And that, of course, is reflected in the general East Bay economy. If you're looking at Alameda County overall, you look at the city of Oakland, good steady numbers, significantly higher employment than back in 2008. In fact, Oakland's almost 15% higher than back then. And of course, Alameda about 15% higher than back then. Good, steady numbers. Now, Oakland has slowed down. In fact, so has the county overall slowed down just a little bit over the course of the next couple of years. It all goes back to labor force availability and, of course, competing for every single housing unit with the West Bay. Some sectors are doing great. You look at here in the city, professional technical services doing fantastic. Wholesale is doing good. Construction is up. Other services up. But admin support struggling at this point in time. Again, who's going to work in those jobs? Information's having a little bit of a tough time, but that's a little bit more sector specific. But manufacturing has been such an important part of the Oakland economy. That is also struggling right now. Again, a lack of workers, a lack of space to expand. The needs of manufacturing, which has been so important in the long run in Oakland, well, they're just not being met in this particular economy. And there has to be some conversation about how do you help manufacturing continue to thrive here? Because other parts of the county are actually seeing decent numbers there. So it is important to keep that part of the sector. But putting that to one side, overall wages continue to rise. In fact, wages here have been rising about on par with the overall county. And if you look at the last couple of years, which has been greater, you see the city almost catching up to county averages. Median household incomes here in the city, again, doing great. Now, for years, median household income in the city of Oakland was below the state. Over the last couple of years, it is now higher than the state median. Still lower than Alameda County overall, but higher than the state. This is a fantastic trend, and we should be happy about this. But then again, we also need to understand that part of this has to do with the gentrification process being driven, of course, by a lack of housing supply. Now, if you look at the data, wage growth in the city is actually doing better than in the county overall. It's interesting. Say, for example, people less than a high school degree, over the last 5 years, a 35% increase in earnings compared to 29% for the county overall. Those with a bachelor degree, 38% compared to 26% to the county overall. Good, steady numbers for those who can afford, have the opportunity to live here. So they're doing great. It's a good, steady labor market. But, of course, yet again, a lack of people. Median prices for homes, well, they've settled out just a little bit. But with interest rates down, when the housing market's starting to bounce back, you can expect these numbers to pick up just a little bit in the relatively near future. As for non-residential real estate in the city of Oakland, yet again, very solid numbers. Lots of new investment. You see investors want to put money in this area, but it begs the question. You could build those buildings, but who's going to work in them? One of the most disappointing statistics for 2019 for the city of Oakland was the big decline in multifamily units. Now, I know you see lots of cranes out there, but honestly, from a long-term perspective, you want to see twice as many cranes. The more you can build, the more you can feed these local businesses, the more the city's going to continue to succeed. The little bit of a slowdown is not a good trend, and I'm hoping that the city will make efforts to get these numbers back up again in the relatively near future. Now, city itself. Of course, the center of a piece of our report today is talking about city council district by city council district and what's happening out there. And there's way too much data to really talk about this in concisely over 10, 15 minutes. But let me give you just some high-level overviews of some of the numbers we saw out there for each one of these individual districts. It's such an interesting city because it's so striated and so different on a place-by-place basis. For us, obviously, overall, the general trends are this. Strongest economy in decades. Incomes are up. Poverty is down, not up, pardon me on that. Affordability is relatively stable because of rising incomes. Job and wage growth on par with the broad Bay Area economy, and really every district is benefiting. This is not only helping the wealthy districts. You're seeing districts across the board grow at this particular point in time. But yet again, housing supply continues to be the primary issue here. More housing is going to help a lot. So let's just do some side-by-side comparisons. These are job growth in 2018. I'm sorry, not job growth, but overall job levels in 2018. Not surprising, of course, the #1 region, District 3, home of downtown, well over 60,000 jobs, close to half of all jobs in the region. District 7 coming in a little over 30,000. And then, of course, the smaller districts, ones that have very little in the way, are 2, 5, 4, and 6. These are mainly residential zones, less business overall. District 3 and 1 have the highest wages, a little bit of 7. Not too much of a surprise. Those dense job zones also support the highest end jobs. So it's no coincidence that where you see the jobs, you also see the highest wages. If you think about professional jobs, they tend to be in dense job zones. If you look at places like District 2 and 4, these type of jobs tend to be largely in logistics or retail, places where wages are typically lower. It's more supporting a local community rather than being driving force for the overall economy. But when you start thinking about demographics, yet again, the numbers are pretty good. District 3 and 5, 7, 3, and 5 had the lowest median household income, but those numbers are getting close to 60,000. 4 and 1, which are some of the high-end residential areas, obviously well over 100,000. But again, relatively good news across the board. And unemployment, yet again, very good news, in as much as unemployment everywhere is low. Well, that's good news for workers, not so much for businesses. This, of course, goes back to the idea that job opportunities have never been quite as available as they are right now for local residents, and going out and helping people, getting them trained, getting them into a career path, now more important than ever, because the opportunities are amazing, because, again, labor is in such short supply. District 1. Well, District 1, of course, obviously is one of the faster growing districts, about 2% job growth. Very good numbers on this. It's obviously one district, of course, being relatively high-end, has some of the highest level of educational attainment for its residents. But, of course, this is a district that is very, very dependent largely on what I would call consumer spending sectors: healthcare, hospitality, retail, trade. We know, particularly in terms of hospitality in District 1, they're going to see some problems there. But, of course, healthcare, very important at this particular point in time. Getting into the numbers, up to about 22,000 jobs. Again, a little bit of a slowdown in the last couple of years. But in terms of education, healthcare, steady numbers there. Actually, a little bit of construction, a little bit of manufacturing growth. But remember, these are such small sectors. Those don't add up to a lot of new jobs overall. In terms of demographics, you can see some of the breakdown numbers here. Unemployment in District 1 right now is about 4.2%, a very low number. And overall incomes, you see a relatively strong growth, particularly in that plus 100,000 market. A little bit of a decline for those lower income households. Again, they can't afford to live here, and a lot of times they're simply being forced to move, usually out east. This is a supply problem. But, of course, what it means for this district is that incomes continue to rise. District 2, very good wage growth here, and wage gains were good across every single sector. But, of course, this is the one part of Oakland that actually saw a decline in overall population. That's not the kind of thing you want to see. You want to see new housing stock and population growing to support those local businesses. Wages, of course, in District 2, because of the type of jobs that are there, are much lower in the city overall. It's a very much a retail-type driven number. And overall employment actually declined, again, because those sectors aren't doing very well. If you take a look at the numbers here, you can see the heavy numbers, particularly in that leisure and hospitality and the retail trade, that are really struggling right now. At least you've seen some better numbers here for construction, a little bit in financial services. But overall, again, this district at about 11,000 hasn't seen a lot of overall job growth. On the demographic side, however, things look a little bit better. Yet again, you're seeing a big increase in those number of 100,000 plus households. They're moving in, they're taking the housing. How many of these people work in the East Bay or West Bay? It's hard to say. But, of course, obviously, at least the demographics of the region look a little bit better. Unemployment region here, about 5.1%. So, again, decent numbers overall. District 3, obviously, as already noted, the center of the business part of Oakland, about 64,000. Professional, scientific, technical information, real important office jobs, up 5%. This has by far and away the highest private sector, because these office jobs, these professional services jobs, are very, very good numbers. However, things have slowed down just a little bit. They haven't been growing quite as fast. And remember, as much as the business is strong here, at the same time, it's mainly a renter district. They haven't built enough new apartments, again, in this part, and they need to be thinking about investing in those new high-rise type apartment structures to attract the young, higher income type of worker who wants to be close to these jobs. This is a place where you need lots of new housing. Now you look at the overall numbers, what's going on here? Well, again, very, very solid numbers. 15,000 in that office using professional technical services. Great numbers there. Other services doing well. Logistics doing fairly well at this point in time. Even retail trade, driven by all those office jobs, doing well. But if you look at the downturn, manufacturing, that again is a place which has been struggling a little bit here. Admin support, some of those lower income back office jobs can't really compete in this particular market. And interestingly enough, even finance is down just a little bit. Demographics, here you don't see the same kind of numbers you see in other places. Because it's mostly apartments, a lot of older apartments, it's definitely a lower income community. It's very odd where you see, of course, some of the lowest income residents next to the highest income jobs. The way to rebalance that is lots of new investment in housing. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. We need more of those structures, but good numbers here. District 4, well, District 4, of course, is the most high-wheeled district, with household income at 110,000. Very solid numbers there in terms of growth in incomes. Unemployment very, very tight here because these high-skilled folks have plenty of opportunities out there. It is, however, largely a housing-driven community. Very small number of jobs overall. But what jobs they do have are growing at a relatively a decent pace at this point in time. About 8,500 jobs here. If you look at where these jobs are, largely in ambulatory healthcare, a little bit of retail trade, a little bit of leisure and hospitality. This is very much a local community type market. But again, from a housing perspective, things look pretty good there. You take a look, for example, local demographics. Yet again, you see a big increase in those share of higher income households, very low unemployment rate, very low housing vacancy rate, a very high owner-occupied rate. So this is a well-heeled community, not a lot of business sector, but doing just fine. District 5. Now, District 5, yet again, is a smaller job center, but has been growing well, about 2.2%. It's also seeing some of the best population growth because of new housing stock coming online. Now, it has some of the lowest median incomes in the region and one of the higher unemployment rates. This really is one of the older, more blue-collar kind of workforce-based areas. And the fact that you're seeing more population growth is in part driven by the fact that people can still go there and find some affordable housing. Again, from this particular perspective, you want to look what's going here, a little over 13,000 jobs, better job growth numbers, particularly in the healthcare sector, as always, retail trade up a little bit, logistics doing a little bit better, and even the share of plus 100K households is starting to increase. Now, what you're seeing here, yet again, if you take a look at the number, you start to recognize the beginning of, yes, gentrification. Let's call it what it is. The best way to deal with this is not, again, try to fix the neighborhood, lock things down, but get in front of that. This is the kind of place where you really want to see new investments in housing, continue to push things forward. It has a reasonably high housing vacancy rates, lots of opportunities there to get in and start doing some of the rezoning necessary to help this place prosper. District 6, with the smallest employment base, only 5,200 workers. Of course, yet again, another one of those primarily residential things. But these are good jobs, interestingly enough. While it is small, they have a relatively high payroll rate, 71,000. Get a little bit into the numbers, 5,200. What's driving this? Well, yet again, education and healthcare, a little bit on the high end. But you're seeing a little bit of professional scientific services here, which you have some of those more small office, small businesses that are in that particular space doing well. You take a look at the numbers here. Well, about 27%, 28% of the households earning over $50,000 per year. That number, again, is rising. I take a look on the right-hand side. Unemployment rate's only about 6.1%. Housing vacancy relatively high in this particular area. There's a lot of question as to why that may be, worth looking into at this particular point in time, but relatively good numbers overall. And then last but not least, District 7 coming into the very south part of the thing after holding the title for 7 years. No longer the highest unemployment rate. That's been going. A lot of residents in District 7 are doing better. Wage growth in this part of the city, better than most are all, about 4.4%. With that in mind, though, not a lot of job growth down here. This is one of the regions that because of some of the older industry in this space, having a tough time competing for the limited labor that is out there right now. And also, when you think about the residents in South Oakland, obviously they have some of the lower education rates. This is a region that probably needs some of the biggest investment in what I would call local training, something to really help the local region. And of course, you can do that along with maybe, again, thinking about some new zoning processes. This is a great place for new investment, particularly when you consider the location, close to the airport and everything else. Employment right now, running about 32,000 overall. So it hasn't been growing very rapidly, but still a relatively decent overall job base. Logistics is a big part of the conversation here because we know you think about the ports, you think about the airport, you understand that a lot of those products are moving through this part of town. Now again, those businesses are struggling largely with the lack of labor force, the inability to compete, getting into the region, helping those local residents be qualified for these particular jobs, and yet again, investing in housing can really help in this part of the city overall. Demographics here, well, yet again, you're seeing a little better numbers, a little higher income, not growing quite as fast as other parts of the area, but overall housing vacancy rate drop, overall unemployment rate continues to fall, only 6.4%. Lots of opportunities out there, better numbers. So, lots of data. Whew. You have the report, go through it, all sorts of information. Obviously, the point of this data is to help the conversation flow, understand where your challenges and opportunities are. City of Oakland has great potential in front of it, but a lot of what's going to happen in terms of the City of Oakland depends on short-run conversations about the virus and our response to it, and long-run conversations about housing, zoning, and various sorts of efforts to help the city continue to attract the workforce to help its local businesses grow. GDP growth, we're talking 2% this year, but obviously we're in the midst of downgrading it. If things really do start to get ugly, we're probably going to drop this below 2%. And of course, as I already noted, if it gets into the third quarter of the year, by the fourth quarter of the year, you're going to see some substantial negative numbers and even potential for a recession starting this year into 2021. But for now, labor markets will be tight. Rising wages are the biggest problem corporations have. We think exports and business investment will continue, will be steady, if not great. Inflation, interest rates, debt levels, everything's safe right now. And of course, East Bay right there in front. But the pandemic, how long, how big, we're still wondering. Those labor shortages putting a lot of constraints here. We have equity market bubbles, deflationary pressures, bank lending is too constrained, political uncertainties dominate. But the biggest problem of all we face, really across California, is what I call the appropriation of the conversation by those who want to tell us how bad things are. Miserableism is the term I've used. You know, right now, we have a quality of life that is so much better than it was 20 years ago for most everybody. Now, I appreciate distributional conversations are important, and helping those most in need is something we all need to carry the banner on. But with all that in mind, we have to also understand that with quality of life rising, with good economic fundamentals, we have plenty of opportunities to tackle our true long-run problems. But we're not having the appropriate conversations because every time you turn around, there's yet again someone who wants to tell us just how bad things are. They aren't. They really aren't. And it's time to have the right conversations about the right issues. And that means, from the long-run perspective, how do you build more housing in the state of California? We have everything else except housing. How do you do that? And of course, even right now, everybody's freaking out about this virus. We have the ability to handle this. But the ability to handle it means making the right choices right now. And yet again, you see politics pulling the conversation off of where it needs to be into all sorts of directions. Best thing to do is have the right conversations about the right issues, appreciate what we do have so we can better handle the things we need to handle. If we do that, prosperity in the East Bay, prosperity in the city of Oakland will continue to increase and increase for everybody. And after all, that's exactly what we want. Thank you very much, everybody. Whew, that was a lot. Here comes Barb. I've never talked to a camera quite that long before, but that's been different. Okay.
Thank you very much. And what we're going to do, since we're closing in on the time that we asked you to make a commitment to be with us today, we will take any questions. Email the Chamber of Commerce at my email, bleslie@oaklandchamber.com, and we will get answers from any of our speakers this morning, and we very much appreciate your time. And Chris, obviously very much appreciate you being here as usual. I'm going to close things out really quickly on just a couple notes. First off, I want to make sure on your screen right now you've got some information about a local purchasing website called iamlocal.io. This is not the first time we've talked about I Am Local as a local disruptor to our purchasing economy that supports our local economy. And again, now more than ever, we need to support our local small businesses. Go to iamlocal.io, shop, buy, and support our local economy. And when you do make the purchase, you will actually see what your contribution is to supporting our local economic ecosystem and the small businesses that make us who we are as Oakland. So please check it out. We will be talking more about I Am Local as the year progresses, and we just wanted you to have the information today. I also want to have the opportunity to again underscore and thank our sponsors that really, without their support and commitment as some of our larger economic engines in Oakland, we wouldn't be able to provide the programming that we do. And frankly, we wouldn't be able to have such a strong economy that Chris talked about without these folks being here. So again, Kaiser Permanente, Visit Oakland, Southwest Airlines, Blue Shield of California, one of our newest partners, Comcast, Donahue Fitzgerald Attorneys, and UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, the Port of Oakland, all economic stewards representing a huge amount of jobs in our local economy and very important partners to our effort here at the Oakland Chamber. So support these organizations. We will be talking about them more via social media as well as in our OBR, which will be out next week. And again, we really thank you for your participation today. We know this was an unusual way to share information. We will be sending you the report, as we mentioned earlier. And again, in these times, we really want to find mechanisms and vehicles to make sure you stay up to date and informed about what's happening in our community. So again, thank you very much. Wash your hands. Have a great day.